the FAO. Wonderful to have Dr. Satya Tripathi, who is the Assistant Secretary General for the UN and the head of the UNEP office in New York. We have also with us Professor Walter Yene from Australia. Thank you, Professor, for being here. On our side, we have Dr. K. Vijay Raghavan, who is the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Prime Minister. He is with us. We have also, we'll soon be joined, I think, by Mr. Dr. Ramesh Chand, who is a member in charge of agriculture in India, and also the Secretary of Agriculture, Mr. Sanjay Agrawal, who is already with us, I think. So, and several other very eminent officials from the government, from all over the country, actually, from Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Himachal, Karnataka, Andhra, they are all here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my unique opportunity, most welcome opportunity to welcome you all for this. I just want to say a couple of things, which is that in this post-COVID world, we have to reimagine agriculture. तुमर साहब, मैं कहना ये चाहता था कि ये कोविड की संदर्भ में ये बिल्कुल लाजमी हो गया है, ये बिल्कुल ही निश्चय हो गया है कि हमें कृषि क्षेत्र के बारे में दोबारा से सोचना पड़ेगा, इसके बारे में नई परिकल्पना करना पड़ेगी, क्योंकि because it's clear that nutrition, having nutritious food is a central feature of developing autoimmunities. And despite against COVID, we want to develop autoimmunities. I think having empty calories and calories which have a lot of free radicals, which are introduced by all the chemicals that we introduce in this agriculture, is not going to be a good idea going forward. I think this has become very clear. तुमर साहब, ये है कि हमें कोविड के संदर्भ में फिर से कृषि क्षेत्र की परिकल्पना करना पड़ेगी, क्योंकि सबसे बड़ी जो हमारी जो बचत हो सकती है ऐसे किसी भी वायरस के खिलाफ, वो है कि अपनी शारीरिक इम्यूनिटी सिस्टम को हम उसको मजबूत करें, और उसकी वजह से जो हमें पौष्टिक आहार हमको मिलना चाहिए, खाना पड़ेगा, तभी ये बात हो पाएगा। और अगर हम अपने कृषि क्षेत्र को रसायन से पूरा युक्त करते जाएंगे तो हमारे शरीर में वो क्षमता नहीं रह जाएगी कि हम किसी भी लड़ाई को लड़ सकें. So therefore, I'm really pleased to see all of us on this page, trying to work for agroecology, for a better, agriculture production system. And of course, we all know how important it is to reverse the climate, the carbon footprint, the carbon change, the carbon that we've got, the carbon footprint that we have. And the only way possible, as far as I can make out, is to improve the land's ability to absorb carbon, which we can do by practicing natural agriculture or agroecology. And that's the way to recreate the properties of the land and to absorb back the carbon from the atmosphere into our land. And I think both of those very important issues, those very critical issues, must make it imperative for us to take this route that we are taking with this conference today. And I'm pleased that all of you have agreed to join us, and I hope that all of us will become the carriers, the warriors, as it was a new term, for agroecology going forward. India is already practicing this. There are hundreds of thousands of farmers who are practicing this in our country. So I'm very glad to be able to invite you all to this conference. तुमर साहब, अब मैं आपसे आग्रह करूंगा कि मैंने अपना स्वागत तो कर लिया सबका, और आपसे अब आग्रह है कि अब आप अपना उद्घाटन का जो है वो हमें एड्रेस करें और अपना उद्घाटन वक्तव्य देकर हमको अनुग्रहित करें. नरेंद्र सिंह तोमर जी, कृषि मंत्री, भारत सरकार.
बहुत धन्यवाद राजीव जी. आज इस विचार गोष्ठी में हम सबके मध्य उपस्थित नीति आयोग के उपाध्यक्ष श्रीमान राजीव कुमार जी, नीति आयोग के सीईओ श्रीमान अमिताभ कांत जी, मेंबर नीति आयोग डॉक्टर रमेश जी, और इस पूरे गोष्ठी में राष्ट्रीय अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्थानों के विशेषज्ञ, विभिन्न मंत्रालयों के सचिवगण और उपस्थित सज्जनों, मुझे बहुत प्रसन्नता है कि वर्तमान परिवेश में नीति आयोग ने एक सार्थक पहल की है और आज राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर के प्राकृतिक खेती की दृष्टि से जो विशेषज्ञ महानुभाव हो सकते हैं उन्हें इस कॉन्फ्रेंस से जोड़ा है। मैं इसके लिए नीति आयोग का हृदय से बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूं और सभी लोगों का कृषि मंत्रालय भारत सरकार की ओर से बहुत बहुत स्वागत करता हूं, अभिनंदन करता हूं। मुझे बहुत खुशी है कि भारतीय खेती पारंपरिक पद्धति जो मूल रूप से जैविक रही है को वातावरण के बदलाव के परिप्रेक्ष्य में मान्यता मिल रही है। जैविक खेती जो सभी प्रकार के रासायनिक आदानों का उपयोग को नकारते हुए प्राकृतिक पोषण चक्रों, जीवांश के पुनर्चक्रीकरण तथा जैव विविधता के सिद्धांत पर आधारित है। वैज्ञानिक तर्कों पर भी समय अनुकूल पाया गया है। भारत सरकार पिछले 6 वर्षों से जैविक खेती के प्रचार प्रसार और उत्थान पर जोर दे रहे हैं।
Respected Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, Shri Rajiv Kumar ji, CEO Shri Amitabh Kant ji, Member Ramesh Chand ji, and other participants from national and international institutes. I welcome all the participants to this workshop arranged by NITI Aayog. I am very happy that NITI Aayog has organized this seminar with international organizations and national participants to discuss the possibilities of natural farming and various aspects of this mode of farming. I am confident that the suggestions from this seminar will give future impetus to our resolve to promote natural farming. I am happy to know that the traditional farming systems of India, which had been essentially organic, is getting accepted in the wake of climate change issues. Organic agriculture, which is largely based on natural nutrient cycles, biomass recycling, and management of biodiversity in exclusion of all synthetic chemical inputs, has been found relevant to today's time and has proven its worth in scientific evaluation.
प्राचीन काल से ही अनेक प्रकार की पारंपरिक प्रक्रियाएं हमारे देश में प्रचलित रही हैं, जिसे समय समय पर हमारे किसानों, वैज्ञानिकों व किसान संस्थाओं ने विकसित और प्रचारित किया है। इन विधाओं में अनेक विधाएं आज भी प्रासंगिक हैं और उनका समय अनुसार उन्नत स्वरूप हमारी खेती के उज्जवल भविष्य को दर्शाता है। ऐसी अनेक विधाओं में से प्राकृतिक कृषि किसानों के बीच लोकप्रिय हो रही है।
Since time immemorial, practitioners, scientists, and farmers organizations have developed different types of farming systems, and many of them are relevant even today. Many systems have been evolved over time and present bright prospect for the future, but one of them, the natural farming system, has become very popular among farmers in the country.
भारत सरकार द्वारा जैविक खेती के प्रचार प्रसार के लिए कई योजनाएं चलाई जा रही हैं, जिनमें पारंपरिक कृषि विकास योजना प्रमुख है। PKVY 2015 में माननीय प्रधानमंत्री द्वारा छोटे और सीमांत किसानों के बीच जैविक खेती को बढ़ावा देने के लिए शुरू की गई थी और अब तक 7 लाख हेक्टेयर क्षेत्र को जैविक किया गया है और पिछले 4 वर्षों में 8 लाख किसान जैविक अपना चुके हैं। परंपरागत कृषि विकास योजना एक बृहद योजना है जो प्राकृतिक खेती सहित सभी प्रकार के जैविक खेती को बढ़ावा देती है। आंध्र प्रदेश, कर्नाटक, हिमाचल, केरल राज्यों ने PKVY और अन्य राज्य पहलों के तहत प्राकृतिक खेती को लिया है। आंध्र प्रदेश ने पिछले 3 वर्षों में PKVY और RKVY के तहत 2 लाख हेक्टेयर क्षेत्र को प्राकृतिक खेती के तहत लिया है। वर्तमान में देश में 27.77 लाख हेक्टेयर क्षेत्र में जैविक खेती की जाती है, जिसमें PKVY उत्तर पूर्वी क्षेत्र के लिए मिशन ऑर्गेनिक वैल्यू चेन डेवलपमेंट के तहत लिया जाता है। इन योजनाओं के तहत जैविक खेती को बढ़ावा देने के लिए 1520 करोड़ रुपए का प्रावधान किया गया है। देश में ऑनलाइन प्रमाणित जैविक उत्पादों की बिक्री के लिए एक समर्पित ई-कॉमर्स पोर्टल शुरू किया गया है। मुझे बताते हुए खुशी हो रही है कि पोर्टल पर लगभग 2.2 लाख किसान पंजीकृत हैं। जैविक उत्पादों के निर्यात की संभावनाओं को ध्यान में रखते हुए भारत के जैविक उत्पादों की ब्रांडिंग के लिए एक व्यापक अभियान की रणनीति पहले से ही प्रक्रिया में है। यह भारतीय जैविक उत्पादों के लिए वैश्विक बाजारों तक पहुंच को सक्षम करेगा।
Government of India has been promoting organic farming under different schemes such as Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana and Mission Organic Value Chain Development in Northeast India. Especially PKVY, which is Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana, was launched in 2015 by Honorable PM to promote organic farming among small and marginal farmers. And as of now, around 7 lakh hectares is covered and 8 lakh farmers were involved in organic farming in the last 4 years under the scheme. Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Himachal, Kerala, they have been involved in natural farming under this scheme. Especially Andhra Pradesh has brought around 2 lakh hectares under this natural farming under PKVY scheme. Similarly, as per the directives of Honorable PM, Mission Organic Value Chain Development has been initiated in northeastern region of the country to promote export of organic niche crops in the region. An amount of rupees 15-20 crores is provided for promotion of organic farming under this scheme so far. A dedicated e-commerce portal was launched for sale of authentic organic products online in the country. I am happy to inform that around 2.2 lakh farmers are already registered onto the portal. Keeping in view the potential of export of organic products, extensive campaign for branding of India organic produce is already under process. This will enable access to global markets for Indian organic products.
कृषि के प्रसार और उत्थान के लिए इस योजना के अंतर्गत विशेष प्रावधान किए गए, जिसमें जैविक आदानों पर जोर न देकर किसानों के इस विधा में क्षमता निर्माण पर सर्वाधिक ध्यान दिया गया है और इस विधा में पारंगत किसानों को मास्टर ट्रेनर के रूप में प्रमुख प्रचारक का दायित्व दिया जा रहा है। इस योजना में प्रयास होगा कि विशेषज्ञों व प्रचारकों का ब्लॉक स्तर पर संस्थागत निर्माण कर अधिक से अधिक किसानों को जोड़ा जाए। प्राकृतिक कृषि जैविक कृषि का भविष्य की ओर बढ़ता एक कदम है तथा आशा जगाता है कि भविष्य की कृषि सभी प्रकार के रसायनों से मुक्त होकर प्रकृति संरक्षण के साथ साथ अपने नागरिकों के लिए स्वस्थ व सुरक्षित भोजन की उपलब्धि सुदृढ़ करेगी।
Natural farming is an indigenous system of farming based on cow dung, urine products, biomass mulching and soil aeration principles. The system also offers management of biodiversity and judicious use of natural resources. I hope with an adoption of natural farming, not only our farmers will be free from that of use of chemical inputs and have less market dependence with increasing strength to our agroecology.
प्राकृतिक कृषि हमारे देश की स्थानीय गाय की प्रजातियों के गोबर व मूत्र से बने उत्पादों जैसे बीजामृत, जीवामृत के प्रयोग तथा मिट्टी में लगातार हवा के प्रभाव को बनाए रखने के मूल सिद्धांत पर आधारित है। इसमें जैव विविधता निर्माण तथा प्राकृतिक संसाधनों के सतत उपयोग को भी रेखांकित किया गया है। मुझे आशा है कि इस विधा के अधिकाधिक प्रयोग से जहां न केवल कृषि रसायनों पर हमारी निर्भरता कम होगी, वहीं हमारे पर्यावरण व परिस्थिति तंत्र को भी मजबूती मिलेगी।
Natural farming depends on cow dung and urine products, biomass mulching and management of biodiversity. And this adoption of natural farming among farmers will make the farmers free from use of chemical inputs and market dependence with increased strength to our agroecology.
प्राकृतिक खेती पर विशेष बल देने के लिए परंपरागत कृषि विकास योजना के अंतर्गत भारतीय कृषि प्राकृतिक कृषि पद्धति बीपीकेपी परियोजना को समाहित किया गया है। इसे लागू करने के लिए स्पष्ट दिशा निर्देश सभी राज्य सरकारों को भेजे गए हैं। आगामी 5 वर्षों में 20 लाख हेक्टेयर अतिरिक्त क्षेत्रफल को जैविक खेती के तहत कवर करने का प्रस्ताव है, जिसमें बीपीकेपी के तहत 12 लाख हेक्टेयर क्षेत्रफल भी शामिल है।
BPKP has been made, which is natural farming, is now being made part of the PKVY, and states have been given freedom to choose any kind of organic farming, including natural farming, under this system. And then this system is based on the institutional development, capacity building, and block mode of implementation.
मुझे अत्यंत हर्ष है कि नीति आयोग अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्थाओं के साथ प्राकृतिक खेती की संभावनाएं एवं इस विधा के विभिन्न आयामों पर विचार विमर्श हेतु इस गोष्ठी का आयोजन कर रहा है। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि इस गोष्ठी में आए सुझाव से प्राकृतिक खेती को बढ़ावा देने के हमारे संकल्प को और बल मिलेगा तथा हम अपनी योजना को और भी व्यापक रूप दे सकेंगे। और जैसा कि प्रधानमंत्री जी ने कोविड के दौरान आत्मनिर्भर भारत की बात कही है, तो भारत को आत्मनिर्भर बनाना है तो निश्चित रूप से इस दिशा में भारतीय प्राकृतिक कृषि पद्धति यह आने वाले कल में मील का पत्थर साबित होगी। इस गोष्ठी की सफलता के लिए मैं आप सबको बहुत शुभकामनाएं देता हूं और यह आश्वस्त करना चाहता हूं कि आपके विचार विमर्श के दौरान जो निष्कर्ष आएंगे वो निष्कर्षों को परीक्षण करके हम लोग जरूर क्रियान्वित करने का एक सार्थक प्रयत्न करेंगे। नीति आयोग को बाकी सबको बहुत बहुत बधाई, धन्यवाद।
I am very happy that NITI Aayog has organized this seminar with national and international organizations to discuss the possibilities of natural farming and various aspects of this mode of farming. I am confident that the suggestions from this seminar will give further impetus to our resolve to promote natural farming, and we will be able to give our plan a more comprehensive form as emphasized by our Honorable PM under Atmanirbhar Bharat. Right.
आपका बहुत 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 धन्यवाद तो श्री तोमर साहब, आपके वक्तव्य से हम लोगों को बहुत इनकरेजमेंट मिलेगा, हमको बहुत शक्ति मिलेगी और मुझे पूरी आशा है कि आपके नेतृत्व में भारतवर्ष में हम लोग प्राकृतिक खेती को दिन दूनी रात चौगनी प्रगति करने के लिए करने में सक्सेसफुल होंगे, कामयाब होंगे। थैंक यू वेरी मच मिस्टर श्री तोमर। Your inaugural address will really inspire us and encourage us in this conference today. And I'm sure that under your leadership, under your guidance, with your guidance, India will be able to make very rapid progress in the propagation of natural farming. As you have said, you already have so many schemes going forward. I do hope, sir, that you will stay with us. मुझे आशा है कि आप कुछ देर हमारे साथ और रुकेंगे, मगर आपका आने का बहुत शुक्रिया और अगर आप थोड़ी देर और रुकेंगे तो हम लोग कृतज्ञ होंगे। Can I now request Mr. Pawan Sukhdev, the Global President of the WWF, to take over the moderation as a moderator of the next session and conduct the proceedings. Thank you very much, Pawan, again for joining us. I'm not spending time in introducing you in great detail. I think you're so well known already. So please take over and lead us on into the first section for the conference. Mr. Sukhdev.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Very kind of you to introduce me. And Honorable Minister Tomar, Dr. Kumar, Professor Chand, Ramesh. So I am really privileged to be coordinating this panel for you because of its wonderful participants. We have with us Professor Philip Landegren, who is from the Boston College, and he is the founding director of their Global Public Health Program. Of course, public health is absolutely heart and center of our attention these days, as was rightly pointed out by your introduction, Dr. Kumar, that if we do not strive for autoimmunity through the nature of our agri-food systems, then that would be a huge cost and a lost opportunity. I'm also very proud that we have on our panel Professor Walter Ihene, a gentleman whose work has inspired me personally, and thank you, Professor, for being kind to join us on this panel. He was earlier with CSIRO, where he was a very distinguished scientist, climate as well as microbiologist, and he is the founder of an organization called Healthy Soils Australia, and he has done some remarkable work in thinking on soil health, a very important part of the ecosystem, the natural wealth which enables us to have sustainable agriculture. And I'm also very pleased to find here also my dear friend Dr. Pushpam Kumar, who has been a collaborator and a partner in the Green Accounting for Indian States projects many years ago, together with myself. And after that, he has been a collaborator in TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems project, and also a director of the study that was concluded recently, which is called TEEB for Agriculture and Food, of which, of course, the study leader is the next panel coordinator, that is Dr. Alexander Muller. Thank you, Alexander, for joining us on this session. It is my privilege just to say a few words of introductions by way of framing the topic that our panel is covering today. It has been said very wisely that agriculture is more about biology than about chemistry. And when we recognize that reality through the manner in which plants grow and feed themselves, and the role of microorganisms and the role of soil microbiology in feeding plants, then I think we come to a different and deeper understanding of the role between ecosystems and agricultural systems and food systems. And which is why many of us who have been involved in this TEEB study, the Economics of Ecosystem study, actually refer to these systems in one term. We call them eco-agri-food systems, recognizing that life begins in the ecology, then it moves to agriculture, and then finally is converted to food systems. My first point is that in 2016, the Global Nutrition Report actually pointed out in very stark terms that our food systems, our diets, have become the #1 global burden of disease. In other words, that the cost to health of our diets, what we eat, is greater than the cost to our health coming as a result of cigarette smoking or AIDS and other such diseases. So we need to recognize this reality, and this is not a result of a reaction to the COVID crisis. This is a report that was published 4 years ago. So this understanding and knowledge has been there, and we need to maybe acknowledge it even more firmly today. My second point is that when we talk about agriculture, we forget that it is a system. It is part of a system. There is ecology, there is nature, and then the nutrients and the fresh water and the soil fertility that enables plants to grow is part of a substrate of nature, which we need to manage and respect in order that it can do its job, in order that it can create soil productivity and agri-productivity. And that, of course, we also need to manage downstream, which is the food systems. In other words, what do we grow and how do we convert them into food that is nutritious and is not merely, as Dr. Kumar rightly said, just calories and free radicals. So this entire systemic approach to food is really very important. But unfortunately, today, sirs and colleagues, we are in a situation where most of the measurement of the performance of food systems comes in terms of quintals per hectare of a single crop, or kilograms per hectare or tons per hectare. We are forgetting that actually we are talking about not just the farm when we talk about food system, but the entire system, which means that we have to be conscious of the fact that it is our food systems that are the largest user of fresh water. In other words, if there is water scarcity, normally the cause can lie somewhere in these food systems, 80% on average, and it can be as high as 90% in some regions, is basically being used by agriculture in terms of freshwater scarcity. That is a key driver. In terms of climate impacts, if we look at the whole food system, all the way from the forest, let us say in Brazil, Indonesia, wherever that was cut in order to create space to grow soya or beef or palm oil, which was then in turn transported across many continents and created climate impacts. If we account for all of that, then the impact of these eco-agri food systems on climate is not merely the 17 to 25% that is usually discussed and reported in UN reports, but it's actually more like 47 to 53% if we account for the overall impact of food systems on climate. So we cannot really have a meaningful dialogue, international dialogue on climate, without having a meaningful dialogue on food systems. And my fourth point here is that we need to recognize the role that food systems play in terms of employment. Food systems employ 1.4 billion people. That's more than 35% of the global workforce. In India, we have comparable numbers, which I will later on request my friend Professor Dr. Pushpam Kumar to comment on. But as the largest employer, how can we come away from food systems without understanding the role that they play in providing employment? And unless we improve the livelihoods of the farmers, how will development work? And this, my friends and distinguished colleagues, is one of the key challenges that I hope that we will address in addressing food systems. Today, if we look at the total amount of jobs, total global amount of jobs that are available in the auto sector, that is only 15 million jobs. The total jobs in the steel sector is about 7 million. The total jobs in the information technology sector is also about 7 million. Compared to that, we are talking about 1,400 million jobs in the agricultural sector. There is simply no way in which we can displace the role today of these jobs, which are mostly in the case of small farms. I mean, the technical definition, less than 2 hectares. Most of these jobs, 1 billion or 1.1 billion of them, are small farming jobs. We simply do not have an economic alternative except to make small farming better. And by better, I mean that it should be higher yield, it should generate lower risk. In other words, it should be more resilient, and it should have fairer prices. In other words, it should be more profitable, more resilient, and through that process, generate more income in the hands of the farmer. And that, to me, needs to be a very strong policy focus in all developing countries. And India is clearly one important example. And I think in that context, I'm very pleased to be part of this discourse and discussion on natural farming. And I look forward to some of the evidence base that is coming up gradually, which demonstrates the higher yields and the higher resilience. In other words, resistance against the fluctuations of storms and cyclones, floods and droughts, which happen as a result of climate change. And also, hopefully, look towards some discussion on fairer prices. How do we get a better system of pricing so that the farmers can enjoy some of these benefits? I don't wish to labor these important issues further, but to welcome our panel. So I would request, given that the focus today is very much in the context of the COVID crisis, where the world is still struggling, reeling from the deaths. In the US, more than 100,000 people have passed away thanks to the coronavirus. Globally, there are more than 5 million infected, and many countries, including Brazil in the West and ourselves, we are still affected by this. So it's not over yet, and the economic impacts are not over yet. So the significance of this crisis and health and public health and the understanding that nature plays in public health is in fact a very important understanding. This virus came from the world of nature, or mismanaged nature. The interaction between man and nature being mismanaged is the cause of this particular crisis, as I understand it. So first, I would like to welcome Professor Philip Landegren to comment on the role of ecology and nature in the context of agriculture and food systems, and to give us his thoughts in about 10 minutes. Professor, I welcome and hand the floor to you. I'm sorry, I seem to have lost him. Could we, have we lost Professor Landegren? I can't seem to see him.
He's there. He's muted. Yeah. Yes. He's there on the call.
Oh, yes, I see. Philip, would you kindly unmute yourself? I would like you to comment on the health dimensions and comment on the topic of our subject. Seem to have. While we sort out the technology, Walter, are you ready to go with your comments to begin with? So you'll have to press the button on the left-hand side, which says mute, unmute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can now.
Very good.
Sorry.
Okay,
yes.
well, look, thank you so much for the invitation. Great pleasure to be here. And really, it's very, very important looking how India can harness its excellence in agroecology, because really this is how we have to go forward globally, as you've already indicated. A bit of background, yes, I'm a research scientist. I started 50 years ago, CSRO, tropical crops and pastures, CSRO soils, but very much looking at the soil microbial ecology. It was, of course, the Green Revolution, and we were all focused on maximizing yield. But of course, that was always looking above the ground. How do we increase yields? Because that's what we're harvesting. But we, in a sense, ignored what was happening below the ground. So it's that soil microbial ecology underground, which is actually critical, because that's, in a sense, how nature naturally managed its biosystems, its hydrology, the climate, and the whole nutritional health of us and the whole biosystems we depend on. And of course, it's really now understanding those natural processes of soil microbial ecology that governs, in a sense, whether we can feed the 10 billion of people that are projected to be here within 30 years, and whether we can have the nutritional integrity in our food that meets those health criteria that you talked about so importantly. And of course, the beautiful thing is nature gives us all this evidence because, you know, in a sense, nature has evolved these biosystems. Yes, we have very productive biosystems, rainforests that grow on very low nutrient soils, productively, sustainably. So the message is it's there, but how do we understand those processes, use them in agriculture to secure the food security, the nutritional health going forward? Same situation happens in arid areas. I mean, nature regenerates and rehydrates deserts. 95% of Australia's deserts are green. And how do we understand these processes and again use them to rehydrate and regenerate the 5 billion hectares, 40% of the land surface that we have turned into desert and wasteland over the last 8,000 years through our agriculture? And the answer is nature can do it, and so can we, provided that we look at these processes. And in a sense, that is now the enormous opportunity before humanity. How do we actually get back down under, look at the soils underground, understand these natural processes, and use them to build a whole new agroecology? Now, obviously, there's some questions. That's good. There's always more questions, and it's very important to ask questions. But basically, nature gives us the evidence. And I was very, very grateful and pleased to be invited last November to come to Andhra Pradesh. Vijay Kumar sort of basically, and FAO gave us that invitation to basically inspect, but also examine the scientific veracity of the zero budget natural farming, but particularly the pre-monsoon dry seeding systems that farmers throughout India have been innovating. And these are world-class, critically important processes because they are, just as I said before, taking these natural processes and allowing us to regenerate, rehydrate what were previously bare, arid wastelands into what Vijay calls 365-day green cover crops. Even if we look at India now, 75% of the time and area, the land is effectively red. It is bare, exposed land, heating, aridifying, eroding. But nature, of course, kept it always green. And through these pre-monsoon dry seeding strategies, we now have a potential to actually regenerate, regreen these lands, produce very productive food crops, and do that without all these high inputs that we thought we needed in the Green Revolution. And so really, it's basically looking at the science of these processes. Certainly there's always more to know, but understanding how they work and then designing agro-ecosystems that utilize them, and in that way basically allow us to rehydrate, regenerate our landscapes. The wonderful message is, yes, we can do it. Indian farmers are demonstrating, world leading, demonstrating this excellence. And the only problem is we're running out of time. We have to start doing this fundamental scaled up transition this decade, because otherwise climate extremes are going to start limiting that very, very seriously. And so it's just very important what we're having this evening, this discussion, but also the initiatives that flow from it, to say how do we practically, commercially scale up now these innovations. We can provide all the substantiation and verification of the science. I know the Academy and others have asked questions. Yes, we can answer those questions. But that's not the point. The point is scaling up practically on the ground with farmers. And there's close to 1 million farmers doing it already in India. And how do we actually facilitate and help that and use that to take this whole agroecology onto a global stage, and really India leading globally in that position. So that's all I want to say now, but then any questions that arise and ongoing discussions, very, very keen to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Yene. And so good of you to introduce some of these key points, including the remarkable example that you mentioned of the dry seeding in pre-monsoon seasons. And I think we will probably come back with some questions on that. But I'd just like to check whether our technology has found us and whether Professor Landrigan is here. If he can please indicate using his video that he is or not. And if it's still not possible to connect with him, then I have some questions for my friend Dr. Pushpam Kumar. Philip, can you get through? Can we see?
He has some medical emergency, sir.
Oh my gosh, okay. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
He's a doctor, so yeah.
Yeah, of course.
He'll connect in some way, yes.
Okay, no problem, it's fine. So Pushpam, the issues that we have are significant. It is the reality of our ecological systems and our agricultural systems, given that there are increasing levels of stress due to climate change, given that we have some degree of erratic behavior in the monsoon systems, and given on the other side of the opportunity that we clearly have different models, including those of the natural farming that Walter has just referred to in his remarks. I think we are at a very interesting crossroads. We are potentially able to at least conceptualize how we could address the needs of perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 farmers in India who are in the context that I described, the small farming context, and whose agri-productivity is actually essential for food security in India, and at the same time whose incomes are actually essential to be able to help them and their families up the curve of development. How do you see the importance of the job-creating potential of agriculture in India? How do you see on the other side of this system, how do you see the importance of the natural capital, as we call it, of India, in supporting that job-creating potential? Could you talk to us about these things, please?
Thank you, Pawan. And with your permission, if you allow me, I would like to speak in Hindi so that, because I can see they have to translate. So yes. At least that, time they can save. So thanks very much. And Honorable Minister, if he is there, and Dr. Rajiv Kumar. देखिए अभी
सॉरी मिनिस्टर साहब को कुछ काम था, वो चले गए हैं. अधिकांश लोग जो यहाँ पर हैं वो अगर आप अंग्रेजी में बोलेंगे तो ही शायद बेहतर रहेगा.
Perfect.
हिंदीवादी कम है.
Thanks very much. So, if we see right now what is happening, that the whole global system is under pressure, which you have referred, Pawan, in terms of pressure on nature and biodiversity. And one of the indicator which we are seeing as COVID-19, this pandemic, is due to the fundamental disharmony between nature and humans through domestication of the wild and habitat fragmentation, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. So that is COVID, and that is true. I mean, and there are studies showing that the natural capital or natural wealth is on decline, by the way. I mean, for the whole world, at least for 140 countries in last 25 years, natural capital, although GDP and the wealth is on rise, but natural asset is on decline. And with the help of Ministry of Finance, Government of India, we did some studies, I mean, UNEP, and in 2018, and there also we found that since 1992, although we are doing very good on ag productivity or GDP, but natural capital, that is topsoil, groundwater, surface water, soil salinity issues, land degradation, they are showing a declining trend in the sense that their health is on decline. Now, in this context, the pandemic comes, and pandemic brings two pandemics. One is your health pandemic, and you know the death, more than 5 million, and in India also we have lots of death, although fortunately not as fatal as the rest of the world, but still it is there. And that has created also economic pandemic. It is the biggest depression, even bigger than the Great Depression of 1930s. And that means that shrinking of the output and the employment. Employment has been a big problem for India. You were asking what is, Dr. Rajiv Kumar is here and he would have all the data. Roughly 42% employment of all the jobs in India, or at least of the productive labor force, is in ag sector. 97% of that 42% is in rural areas. That is the reality. So basically, to drive the point, chunk of the employment is in animal husbandry, poultry, hunting, fishing, and of course, agriculture in a big way. Now, there are estimates coming that there are a lot of people who will be affected and have been impacted. And the related issue is that at least 400 to 500 million people will be pushed into the poverty line. I mean, $1.9, well accepted, one can debate about it, and already backlog of the poor people. So Government of India, which has been doing enormous job on this front on poverty alleviation and employment generation, will still be there for some time, and that will have impact on the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 1 and 2. We are already struggling, and this will add. I mean, India is not only a country. What India does will define the characteristic of the objective of the SDG. So we will be struggling. Now this pandemic comes, and we have this huge unemployment globally and of course in India, and the incidence of poverty. Now, Honorable Minister talked about organic farming, and we have excellent example from Andhra Pradesh, which have been referred here. It has two defining characteristics. One is it has huge employment generation potential. I myself was in Andhra Pradesh. We gathered some data with the help of Dr. Vijay Kumar on the ground, and Dr. Rajiv Kumar will be happy to know that the employment elasticity of output, this activity of zero budget natural farming, is as high as construction sector. And as you all know, construction sector has very high employment generation potential. So that is one. Second, it does not require much of capital. And third, it brings the element of what Honorable Prime Minister always says, inclusive growth, sabka saath, sabka vikas. And this has a fantastic feature that includes everyone in the process. I have seen from my own eyes. We don't need much of the refined data to say that it is happening. It is really helping in achieving sabka saath, sabka vikas and Atmanirbhar Bharat, which have been referred by Honorable Ag Minister. So I think if zero budget natural farming coming from Andhra Pradesh can be upscaled in rest of India. I mean, in some part of India like Mizoram, Pawan, it is already happening. And in other parts also people are showing interest. It is a people-driven initiative because it has double dividend benefits, that it creates job and it requires less capital. And it provides security and livelihood option to the marginal poor people. So that is really fascinating. And if it can be upscaled in the post-pandemic era, we have real chance to succeed and make an Atmanirbhar Bharat. One more thing, as we know, globally, we are touching around $10 trillion as the relief package. I mean, $9.83 trillion as of now, as we are speaking. So, and in India also, Honorable Prime Minister has announced 20 lakhs crore package. One can go into the details. If some part of it, which is 10% of GDP, roughly speaking, can be allocated to this natural farming, I think it will bring the transformative change and the agenda in terms of employment, creation of job, confidence in people, and I mean, the marginal value, what we economists always talk about it, marginal value of this activity will be much higher because the benefit will be going, it will be accruing to the poorest of the poor. I will stop. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pushpam, for bringing in a number of important issues to the table, bringing in the economic dimension. I noticed that Professor Landrigan is back from work. Thank you for coming back to us.
Yes, I'm a physician. I was called out on a medical emergency, but I have a few minutes
Sure.
if I might be allowed to talk, and then
Please,
I may have to run.
Please do that, Philip. And so what we've had very briefly is a comment on soil biology and the fact that techniques such as dry seeding are succeeding. That's from Walter. And he talked a lot about agroecology and the science and the processes behind the science. Pushpam brought in the economic dimension, emphasizing that the generation of jobs in sustainable agriculture is very high, that they take very little capital and they generate growth for the poor. That means inclusive growth. And also talked about the possibility of reallocating some of the fiscal stimuluses that around the world may total up to $10 trillion towards renewed investment in sustainable agriculture and natural farming in India. We would just like to hear from you in the short time that you have with us. How does this play into the world of public health, given where we are, given the COVID context, which we wanted you to comment on? How does this play into that? And where does the role of nature and respect and working with ecology come into this picture?
Yes, well, thank you, Mr. Sukhdev, and thank you, all of you. Thanks to the Minister for having started this meeting, and many thanks to my good friends, Satya Tripathi and Pushpam Kumar, for having invited me to be part of it. So I'm a physician, specifically a pediatrician and public health doctor. I've been involved for many years in studying how adverse factors in the environment impact human health. I've particularly focused on environmental influences on children's health because of the fact that children are so inherently vulnerable. If you'll excuse the phrase, they tend to be the canaries in the mine, the first people in the population, not so much in COVID, but in general terms, they're the first people in the population to get sick when an adverse environmental factor comes along. And of course, another reason to protect children is that they're all of our future. If we don't keep them safe, then we have no future. So most of my work the last few years has focused on air pollution, the impacts of air pollution on health specifically. I chaired a Lancet Commission on pollution and health. We published our report in the Lancet 2 years ago, and through that I got to meet Pushpam and Satya, and they invited me to come over to India last summer, which I did in July last year. We went down to Andhra Pradesh for a day, and we visited with Vijay Kumar and the people there who are doing the zero budget natural farming, and I was deeply impressed. And now as I look at that experience through the lens of COVID-19 and the pandemic and the toll that it's taking, I don't in any way pretend to be an expert in soil ecology or agriculture. It's a long way from where I live. But I think there are some parallels between the work that we're doing and what you're doing in India with regenerative agriculture. And if you'll allow me to share my screen for a moment, I've got a very quick series of slides here which I can show to make my point. I just hit share there.
Okay, yeah, we can see you. Yes, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Picture of a sunset, okay. And then here are my slides. Here they are, good.
Yeah.
Slideshow, yeah. Okay, can you see that slide?
Yes, COVID-19
yes.
Global One, yes.
Good, okay. So let me begin with this quick quote from President Franklin Roosevelt from 1932. The notion that out of every crisis, every tribulation, mankind rises with some share of greater knowledge, higher decency, of purer purpose. Or to put it more crudely, no crisis should ever be wasted. And one of the things that we've seen in COVID is, on the one hand, it's taken this enormous death toll, almost 6 million people infected around the world and closing in on 400,000 deaths. In your country, India, 165,000 people known to be infected and 4,711 deaths. Huge death toll in my country, the United States. But at the same time, there's this unexpected bright spot, this extraordinary reduction in air pollution,
yes,
the likes of which none of us have seen. And just to give you a couple of quick pictures on that, here's a picture from Delhi, from the gate of India. Here's a satellite picture comparing early this year with the current period of time in China, similar in Italy, similar in the northeastern United States. There's just been this extraordinary clearing of the air. And people are seeing skies that are bluer than they've ever seen. They're breathing better air than they've ever inhaled. And it forces us to ask what comes next, because eventually, after whatever toll it takes, this pandemic is going to subside. Economies are going to restart painfully, but they will restart. And at that point, we need to ask ourselves, what will happen to air pollution or soil pollution or to our reckless use of pesticides and fertilizers? It's all the same question, just wrapped in different rows. What do we continue to do business as usual? Do we go back to pollution and disease and environmental degradation? Or do we have the courage to imagine a cleaner world and the strength and the political will to work for such a world? And it's really the choice. Will we have the moral courage to do what's right here, what needs to be done to save ourselves or to save the planet? I had been going to stop there, and then as I heard the opening remarks this morning, I decided to add just one more slide, which I think is an important slide to make, especially since there are some distinguished economists on the panel here this morning. And that has to do with what we've seen in the United States over the past 50 years on pollution control and GDP. So the line, this is covering the time period from 1970 to about 2015, 2016. The gray line that trends downward across the slide from 1970 to the present is an aggregate measure of the 6 major air pollutants. And in the USA, because we passed the Clean Air Act in 1970, and at least until the last couple of 3 years, have been enforcing it quite vigorously, we've reduced our air pollution by something like 70%. And at the same time, the GDP in this country has grown by 250%. So it just, these two facts put side by side, put the lie to the proposition that pollution control, that a clean world kills jobs and stifles the economy. And so I'll close it there. I'll just say thank you. And because I'm a pediatrician, I'll again make the argument that this is something we have to do, not just for ourselves, but for our kids and for our grandchildren. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Philip, for reminding us of these really, truly significant connections between the health of the planet and the health of humans, and especially the future of the planet and the future of humans, that is for our children. The two are clearly much more aligned than we've cared to admit in the past.
I think if I may, Mr. Sukdev,
yes.
I think it's very important to look at all of these issues through the lens of their impacts on human health. Because if we're only talking about molecules of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or organophosphates in the soil, it's fairly abstract and removed from the lives of most people. But
yes.
when we talk about impacts on people, and specifically impacts on children's health, brings it all home, and I think, quite frankly, is more likely to mobilize action.
Mobilize action, absolutely true. Completely and wholeheartedly agree with you there, Philip. In fact, Dr. Pushpam Kumar and I have both been involved in propagating the importance of maintaining and managing natural capital, ecology, ecosystems, biodiversity. And very often we have both described it as public wealth, because it is public wealth. It belongs to everyone and no one. And it's been difficult to get that message across. But now when we say that, like public health, which now everyone understands, like public health, nature also is public wealth. You need to invest in it. Yeah.
The clearing of the air that we've seen during the pandemic has shown us that another way is possible.
Yeah.
That this is not a matter of technical feasibility, it's a matter of moral courage and political.
That's right. That's correct. I think we're very much in alignment. Walter, would you like to comment on the role of soil health, which is, in a sense, contributing to and also receiving from the excessive use of pesticides, fertilizers, and so on, and also damaging both on-farm as well as downstream health of the consumers?
Look, yes, thank you very much. And this is really fundamental because, see, it was 420 million years ago when, in a sense, the first life evolved on land and the first soils were created. Then very rapidly, that created hydrology, land-based hydrology and biosystems. And we have evolved using those biosystems and living on those biosystems. And basically, the soil is the crucible, the foundation for all the biosystems, the hydrology, and through the hydrology, the climate, the air quality, etc., that basically Philip was talking about, right?
Yeah.
And so this is absolutely fundamental, because if we can regenerate the health, the buffering of our soils, we don't just have stability in terms of biosystem, climate extremes, hydrology extremes, but we can also basically remove those pollution factors. But I also want to mention something about this whole economic, food and employment situation, because it's actually really wonderfully a major opportunity now. Rather than just looking at economics, let's look at this whole situation from an existential point of view, because every one of those 10 billion people will need a climate, air, water, food, stability, and in a sense, a buffered habitat to live in. And if we can provide that, or better than us providing it, if we can empower them to regenerate that for themselves, that is actually the basis of an economy. That is the basis of employment. So it's not measured in dollars, it's actually measured in, can they get their essentials? And through this whole idea of zero budget natural farming and agroecology and regeneration, the opportunity is to say, yes, we can empower all of those farmers, basically all of that humanity to take control, to actually grow their own food. And what we'll see is actually, of the 10 billion people, some 8 billion we are projecting will be in urban areas or urban concentrations. And so the whole power now of urban agriculture, how do we build these natural cyclic systems into urban agriculture so people can actually recycle nutrients, recycle water, compost organic materials, clean up their environment, but in the process, grow healthy, nutritious food. The last thing I just wanted to mention briefly is, you see, at the moment with economics, it's in a sense we're living in a fraudulent world, because what happens, of course, we talk about the profitable things, but we externalize all the costs. We put those costs onto the environment, onto the taxpayer or onto our children's future. And really one of the biggest costs is the actual damage we're doing to our health. You know, basically the very, very massive, in the United States, some 18% of GDP is now invested in health services that cater for 50% of the population. And by growing healthy food, by taking this empowerment regeneration strategy, we can have massive economic savings because we're not spending all that money on unproductive responses to symptoms, trying to fix health problems that we've created by poor food. You know, the empty calories, toxins, and free radicals that we talked about earlier. So by just simply saying, look, here is a massive economic saving by just getting into preventative health, and we can do that through nutritious food by growing things in this agroecology system.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter, for these wise thoughts and remarks. So in the last few moments of our session, I'd just like to try and summarize some key issues and also perhaps place a few thoughts for the next panel, which will be led by my friend and colleague, Dr. Alexander Muller. We've spoken about a number of issues that are playing into the systemic space that we are talking about, eco-agri-food systems. Ecology is the foundation of our economies. Agriculture is the main employer and the provider of not just food, but also health, a key driver of the health, and also provider of jobs, and at the same time, generator of climate impacts and user of water and provider of a cultural base for our lives in the world. It's ironic, therefore, that something that is so rich and so multifaceted as agri-food systems tend to be subjected to a lens which is so narrow as per hectare productivity. And in fact, that was the challenge that was explored by the study called TEEP for Agriculture and Food, of which Dr. Alexander Muller was a study leader, and it was my honor to support him during that time. And the study was published in 2018, and since then, several further studies have demonstrated that logic, that look, if instead, if I may, Alexander, borrow your example of the 6 blind men and the elephant, if we stop behaving like 6 blind men and the elephant, one touches the tail and says, oh, it's very like a rope, and somebody else touches the trunk and says, oh, the elephant is very much like a snake, and someone touches the side and says, oh, the elephant must be a wall, and someone else touches the leg of the elephant and says it's a pillar. Instead of behaving like that, and the agronomist having one conclusion and the environmental activist having a second conclusion, the health scientist having a third conclusion, and the sociologist having a fourth conclusion, and so on, and everyone fighting with each other. Instead, why don't we as wise men come together and say, well, actually, the elephant is a multifaceted animal, and it is all of the above. Let us recognize those. Let us measure success in agriculture with more dimensions than one, along more axes than just per hectare productivity of staple crops. So this is the study that TEEP Agri-Food has conducted, and its methodology, its approach, what we call the framework of TEEP Agri-Food, has begun to be used by many scientists. And I'm delighted that one of the studies is in India as well, which is done by Dr. Haripriya Gundameda, who's not with us right now, but it is on the wheat and rice systems in Punjab. We need to take that kind of view when we look at agroecology. Look at the whole, not just single parts. And we need to recognize that human health is actually a very important consequence of good food systems, and indeed human ill health is a consequence of bad ones. And therefore, the connection is very deep, as Philip has pointed out, that we need to understand and express these consequences in terms of the well-being of the individual, and especially in the well-being of the person and her health. And I think as we do that, the message will become clearer. The role of nature as the substrate upon which agriculture rests, and the role of the economy as something that draws from that. And we will then be able to engage these multifaceted discussions. In closing, I'll say that another thought that has been raised by our panel, which I hope will be picked up, is this whole issue of the stimulus packages. Yes, they are in the trillions of dollars, an estimated 10 trillion globally. The question is, what will we stimulate? whose incomes will be targeted by these stimulus packages. And I hope that the what we will stimulate includes an inclusive green economy, of which sustainable agriculture and natural farming is absolutely a key driver. It is not only, if I may use the language of the Sustainable Development Goals, it is not only about SDG 2, but as Pushpam has explained, that 97% of the 42% of jobs in India, which are agricultural, are in the small farms, in the farming, in rural areas. It is also about SDG 1, which is poverty, more income in the hands of the poor. It is also about SDG 3, which is human health, not just for the farmers on farm, but also for the consumers downstream. It is also about SDG 6, which is about water, ensuring that we use half the water that is used in natural farming compared to industrial chemical farming. It is also about SDG 13, which is about climate, which is in fact being climate positive with natural farming rather than adding to the climate emissions that happen. And of course, it is about SDG 15, which is life on land. So I could go on and on, but the point is, all of these things, including gender and so on and so forth, almost all the SDGs are in some way tied up with the way we use land and water and how we grow our food. So I think it is absolutely an important policy point. And with that, and our time is up, I'm very happy to hand it over to Dr. Alexander Muller and his distinguished panel. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Pushpa.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We are supposed to do this. I think nowadays this is supposed to be the clapping version. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, over to Alexander, please.
Thank you so much, Pavan, for introducing the next panel. And let me thank you and your fellow panelists for having started this important session in such an exciting way, highlighting that we are talking about multiple benefits of agriculture and not only looking at a very narrow matrix which uses per hectare unit measurements as the only result. What I would like to do in the next 50 minutes together with my panelists, and I will introduce them immediately, is to talk about how can we build back better. It has already been mentioned by my friend Pushpam that much money will be invested in bringing the economy back to scale, but we don't want that just bringing it back. We want to build it back better. And the question is, how do we measure the building back better? What are the new metrics? How bring we in the positive and negative externalities? And I would like to focus it on the question of regenerative agriculture. Because if we do regenerative agriculture, we are building up capital. We are building up natural capital, we are building up social capital, and we are building also up human capital. And this is a very different way to regreen agriculture and to solve problems in the world. Please allow me to provide 3 introductory comments in the beginning. It has already been mentioned that we are in the middle of the COVID crisis. And let's be honest, it is full of uncertainties. We do not really know what is going to happen. Will the virus come back? When will a vaccine be available? We don't know. But what is very clear, the next crisis is waiting behind the corner, the climate crisis. We cannot allow that while the necessary measures are taken to fight COVID, we are forgetting about climate. The climate crisis is a multiplier of already existing risks, and it will create new risks. And in fighting the climate crisis, agriculture plays a key role, both in mitigation and in adaptation. And from my perspective, and let me say it to the organizers, I'm really happy to be invited. We need global leadership to make agriculture part of the solution for regreening the economy. Global leadership is needed, and I'm happy to contribute a little bit with this session to the important role of India. So we need agriculture for building back better. My second comment is, I have been involved in discussions about agroecology and regenerative agriculture since a long time. From my perspective, the most important features of agroecology and regenerative agriculture is it is community-based, it is built on good practices, and it uses knowledge as an input. Let me give you an example of agriculture in the country where I'm coming from, in Germany. Agriculture is the most capital intensive industry in my country. More than 500,000 to 600,000 US dollars per working place, per person working in agriculture. Can you imagine that we would need, and Pavan has mentioned it, for the 1.4 billion people working in agriculture per working place, 600,000 US dollars? Impossible. So we are currently replacing knowledge and good practices by capital and inputs. I personally consider this being a wrong way, and therefore agroecology and regenerative agriculture, building on communities, on good agricultural practices and on knowledge, including traditional knowledge, is another model for leading agriculture into a green future. So the world has to decide, do we want to have knowledge or do we need capital? In the end, I think looking at the figures, the knowledge-intensive agriculture is the better way. Third, brief comment, why regenerative agriculture? FAO has published a study that the world is losing every year 24 billion tons of fertile topsoil. 24 billion tons. They are gone forever. We are losing our natural capital, and we need this natural capital. We need soils, we need water, we need biodiversity to feed the world. So we are destroying the life support system of the future of mankind. And again, regenerative agriculture is going to change it. And therefore, I'm really happy to introduce a very distinguished panel to you. The first speaker will be Professor Ramesh Chand. He's member of the National Institute for Transformation of India, Aayog, and I think we met last time in France. The second panelist is Ravi Prabhu, the Deputy Director General of the World Agroforestry Center, IGRAF. He is currently staying in India. The third panelist, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, the Secretary, Agriculture Government of India. And last but not least, Mr. Daniel Moss, the Executive Director of the Agroecology Fund. And I'm happy to hand over to the first speaker, Professor Ramesh Chand. Sir, the floor is yours. And we have agreed around 7 to 10 minutes for the presentation so that we also have some time for interaction. Thank you very much. Professor Ramesh Chand, the floor is yours.
Mr. Mueller, I've just heard from Professor Ramesh Chand that he's got technical problems. So he's still trying to reconnect, but may not be able to join.
Okay, then we are flexible enough to ask our friend.
Sorry to interrupt. He has joined, sir. Maybe he's unmuted also. Yeah.
Now we will find out. Professor Ramesh Chand, can you hear me? And can we hear you?
He needs to unmute. Professor Chand, you need to press.
My landline connection got disrupted because of this high-speed wind. So through mobile, I'm talking. I hope you are able to hear me, if not able to see me.
We can hear you, sir. We can hear you.
Wonderful, Professor Chand. I just read out your message. Sorry about that.
Anyway, my thought got a little bit unorganized, but I basically wanted to draw your attention to 4 points. At this point of time, we are all aware about what are the adverse implications of agrochemical based farming. Its ecological impact, sustainability impact, its health impact. I think they are known, but they are not moving towards the other kind of farming, that is agroecological farming or different type of net that I will share with the group, that let us look into those reasons. And also India is a country where natural farming has been practiced for centuries and centuries. I think we need to look at what were those reasons which forced us to abandon this. We can address those. The first concern which come to my mind is the concern related to under agrochemical farming and productivity under natural farming. We have different type of but perception even at all level, that productivity level in different system of natural farming, organic farming or other kind of farming, there is a yield penalty. Some of you might which appeared in Nature Communication, which looked at evidence across United Kingdom that if you go for organic kind of farming, what is the yield variation that will happen because of that? That appeared last year in October, that under this organic farming, the yield is 33% less than what is the yield with agroecology. So I'm not questioning it because we have to address these issues. That's why I'm raising it. So if we want to produce the same amount of, authors say that we will require 50% more land, and if we are putting 50% more land, then all the benefit of etc., they are wiped out. So I think we need to address this concern. In fact, even in India, a very respected Dr. Few years after Green Revolution, he published a very useful paper that if Green Revolution technology was not there, probably most of forest of India would have been brought under crop cultivation to meet the food need of the people. Argument of Dr. Hanmantha Rao was productivity variation. So I feel that productivity is at the core of advantage which agrochemical farming right now has over natural farming. Otherwise, parameter, as you all know, that natural farming has a considerable edge about this farming. The second issue which comes to my mind, that that we need to divide in such a way that it fits into the culture of the modern farmers. Over time, our farmers have moved so much in favor of mechanization that even in poverty-stricken pocket of states of Bihar, state of Odisha, you find to harvest their wheat and harvest their paddy using combine harvester rather than making use of manual labor. So if this natural farming, from where the labor will come? I think we have to address that issue also, that natural farming, so that this new culture of farming which has come in India, not to soil their hand, not agriculture. So how we can address this issue of labor preference, that we want some substitution labor. So in the modern farming, we have gone for mechanization in a very big way, and that has saved labor. And today the labor issue is so serious that farmers many a times are asking that even Rega labor should be used at their private farms. So we need to address this issue of labor, very high use of labor in agroecology. You are all expert in natural farming, but I think there is one more issue which we need to address squarely and upfront, but in case of natural farming. We know that in case of agrochemical based farming, the growth driven by use of agrochemical and much of the technological change is embodied in those inputs. So if suppose we shift from a agrochemical farming to natural farming, it can give us one-time change that, okay, you are able to have certain quantity of food production. So what is the growth element in case of natural farming? After all, population 0.5%, food demand is increasing. So even in India, we want to have minimum 2% growth rate to meet requirement of food. So from where this growth element will come in case of natural farming from the present level of farming. Concern which I want to highlight is that certain diseases and outbreak, they are a result of intensive farming. But very often we also find outbreak of those kind of diseases and pests which are not the outcome of modern farming attack which we are having. So can we think of something that that if there is this kind of problem, locust attack is there, or suddenly something comes which is not related to farming, can we have something in natural farming which will help us controlling these kind of menaces? And based on this, I just want to make one small suggestion, last one, to this August group, that we know that we have strong merit of ecological farming, and we know there are certain farming particularly related to productivity. Can we think of starting a marriage between the two, at least in the initial stages? A positive point of both the systems, and we initially go in this way that we minimize the adverse impact of both the system of natural farming in terms of yield, penalty, etc., and another disadvantage of agroecological farming. And then slowly we keep building, we keep developing and promoting natural farming, and to see that one day we reach a stage where we can from agroecological farming to natural farming. So these are some of the thoughts which come to my mind, and I thought I will share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramesh Chand. Really very good that you managed to join us via mobile phone, and we could really understand you very well. And thank you for raising this important question. I think the panel will come back to it. Our next speaker is Ravi Prabhu, as I had announced it already before, Deputy Director General of ECRAF, the World Agroforestry Center, headquartered in Nairobi, but he is now based in India. Ravi, the floor is yours for the next 8 to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And it's a privilege to be part of this panel. I have just 3 points to make, and before Professor Ramesh Chand spoke, I thought I'm going to be making points that everybody else has already made, but he has raised some really important questions, and I will try and respond to them as I go along. So my 3 points basically. We obviously need to work with nature and not against nature. That is the sensible thing to do, and I will go to that briefly. We need to work at appropriate nested scales, and I think that is an element of the discussion I have not heard so far, so I'll spend a little bit of time on that. And I think, and I agree with Professor Ramesh Chand here, we need to build on the best science. But what is the best science? And I'll come back to that briefly. So, working with nature. Well, let me start with what I term as green revolution agriculture. Professor Ramesh Chand is called agrochemical agriculture. And let's examine the basic paradigm before we understand what it is we're trying to do with agroecology or regenerative agriculture or natural farming. The basic paradigm of the Green Revolution was to take land and soil as substrate, to assume that what was there was not good enough and had to be replaced with hybrid seed, better varieties, and be supported by inputs of various kinds, fertilizer, pesticide, water, etc. The fundamental assumption that I've not heard anybody talking about today was that you had an inexhaustible mountain of inputs from where you could draw, and in a huge sink or hole into which all the waste would go. Given those assumptions, agrochemical or green revolution agriculture is the most sensible thing to do. However, we have no planet B. There is no inexhaustible mountain from which we can draw. And The oceans are already dying. We cannot pump more into them. The air is full of the residues of crop burning. Ask any Delhiite and they will tell you why they are leaving their city in November, December, and January. So that assumption of the Green Revolution and agrochemical agriculture was flawed. So we have to flip that on its head and work with nature. Start with the local ecology and then see what we can add. And I think that was what Professor Ramesh Chand was speaking to towards the end when he said, let's start building up. And I agree with that. We start with the local ecology and start building from there. If you do that, and Walter has spoken about the importance of soil biota, in our own research, we have shown 300% productivity increases when we brought back soil macrobiota. Soil microbiota are probably much more important. They are, however, at the moment a black box. It is at the cutting edge of science to understand what is happening in soil ecology with soil microbiota. But then also with plant diversity, how do we bring in plant diversity so that we can practice integrated pest management, so that we can manage the flows of ecosystem services, including water, across the landscape. When we take a look at all of these things in concert, we start understanding, Alexander, how we can build back better with nature as our friend, and nature is not something that we conquer. But to do this, and I will come back to this in my second and third point, we need to work at multiple scales, and we need the best kind of science. So what about scale? Well, another thing that we had, and this actually blights a lot of agricultural research today, is that all of the research is focused on farm, but better actually field level productivity increases, covering the yield gap. The challenge with that is that it looks at the rest of the landscape as the place in which externalities can be dumped. And Alexander, you spoke to both the positive and the negative externalities. The negative externalities of focusing just on the farmer's field is that wastewater or water in the first place is drawn from somewhere and dumped somewhere, and it does not figure in the optimization equation. When we look at nested scales, from the country or the continent down through the country, through the region, through the watershed, to the landscape, to the farm and the village, down to the field, there are no externalities because they are not allowed. And then we can understand what it means to optimize across the system. So we need a landscape scale. Just as we look at the landscape as the biophysical unit, across within which farms, villages, and fields are nested, and landscapes themselves are nested within regions and countries, we need to look across the scales that are the connectors, the supply chains, the value chains, the networks, the forms of social capital that, again, Alexander, you've spoken to. We cannot just focus then on farmer and his or her field. We need all of these scales. When we start doing this, we start looking at optimizing across species and across scales. We can manage water much better. We can see that drawing water, for instance, groundwater through tube wells, depletes other parts of the landscape. We turn rivers that were alive into dead sewers. Anybody who's ever visited the Jamna near Mathura and Agra will understand why they had to flood the river when President Trump visited. It stinks because there's nothing left in it. All the water has been extracted. And that need not happen when you look at the entire landscape. So when you look at a landscape, you can look at the bunds along the fields and plant trees there for nitrogen, for fruit, for shade. 4 degrees Celsius is the difference you would get if you plant trees along bunds and manage the warming effects of the climate crisis. So we need nested scales at the landscape. And then let me come to the science. There was an assumption, I think, that natural farming is back to great-grandpa's farming methods. It couldn't be further from the truth. Natural farming must build on complexity science, must consider the agroecology as a complex adaptive system, and must bring cutting-edge research from complex systems in ecology and the use of big data and technology to understand how we optimize multiple factors simultaneously. And the way we we try and do it at World Agroforestry is to take another metric. We do not look at the yield gap because that is misleading. The yield gap simply measures what would happen in a farmer's field as compared to ideal laboratory conditions for a monocrop. When we look at the land equivalent ratio, how much a piece of land could deliver as we add diversity to the land, you will find the yield gap is more than made up, and we get to land equivalent ratios that are 200% more productive because we've added an intercrop, or we've added a tree, or we've added multi-strata agriculture. So I think that we can make up all of these things when we look at bringing the best science to play, and that best science also involves technology. We do not necessarily have to work with a hoe and a shovel. We can use mechanization, but it has to be appropriate. In France, agroforestry is practiced with tractors. It isn't going back to great-grandfathers' methods of work. So I think we need to revise the paradigms within which we think, and our mental models of what natural farming is all about. I would put to you, ladies and gentlemen, that natural farming is the future because it has the science of the future inherent in it. I'd stop there.
Thank you very much, Ravi from eCraft. Also, I would like to thank you for your flexibility to already address some of the very important questions Professor Ramesh Chand has put on the table. And I would really like to thank him because we are here to also identify problems and ways to solve these problems. And therefore, this panel has to fulfill a very important function to identify gaps in our knowledge on regenerative agriculture, look at the advantages, and also what kind of research do we need in order to go ahead with it. I'm happy to announce now Mr. Sanjay Agarwal from the Government of India. He is Secretary, and I would like to take him the floor for also the next 8 to 9 minutes. Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, the floor is yours. And I can see that your microphone is still muted and your video is also switched off. I see you as a participating here, but your microphone is still muted. Maybe there are some technical problems, and if we do not solve it within the next 15 seconds, then I would ask Mr. Daniel Moss, the Executive Director of the Agroecology Fund, to prepare himself and to jump in, and then we will try Sanjay to give the floor to Sanjay Agarwal afterwards. So now I would like to ask Mr. Daniel Moss to unmute his phone, and I can see him already on the video. Thank you for being so flexible. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon to all, evening. It's a great pleasure to be here. I offer a lot of gratitude to the esteemed authorities from the Indian government and my esteemed colleagues, who are all a source of great inspiration for me personally and for the work broadly. By way of introduction, my name is Daniel Moss. Thank you, Alexander, for the introduction. I'm the Executive Director of the Agroecology Fund. I'm actually going to share a couple of slides to give you a little visual sense of the work. And let me just pull that up as I am sorry here. I had that Can you see it? No, I don't think you can see the slide. Are you able to see slides or no?
No, definitely cannot see the slides. You.
Okay, oh, here we go. Here we go. Perhaps you can see it now?
Now we can see it. Thanks a lot. And if you could increase the size, it would be even better.
Okay, not sure I can do that, but I will. Well, I don't want to risk losing it, so let's bear with it as in its present form.
It's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just. So the Agroecology Fund is a consortium of. I'm sorry, one more technical thing to resolve before I. Here we go. The Agroecology Fund. Still, the slide is visible. Is that true?
Yes, we can.
Mr. Alexander, great, thank you. Okay, the Agroecology Fund is a consortium of nearly 30 donors from philanthropic organizations from the United States, Europe, and Asia. And we pool our resources together in order to support leading civil society networks from all corners of the globe that are working in close collaboration with governments that are seeking to scale up the practice, science, and the enabling policy environment for agroecology. And I offer this screenshot just of some of the, you can see some of the donor agencies that are part of the Agroecology Fund that span from large, well-known philanthropic organizations to much smaller family funds. And you all know about the ecosystem of philanthropy is that there's a great number of philanthropies that have formed across the world. And many of them are keenly interested in agroecology, and we seek to be a vehicle for their interest in supporting agroecology. So here's some of the donors in our network that you can just get a sense of. Well, we had the opportunity recently in February, just prior to the hit of COVID. We were very thankful to be able to come to India to just outside of Bangalore to visit Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. And we chose to bring our network of farmer associations, researchers, policymakers, academicians, and donors to India to get a close-up view of how the scaling up of agroecology has been occurring in India, in particular in southern India. And I want to make a couple of comments to bring forth something that was described in the concept note that was shared about India's global leadership in agroecology. And we wanted to get a sense amongst our network of how that scaling up has happened. What have been the elements of success in the kind of very close collaboration, in particular in Andhra Pradesh, between the women's self-help organizations and the state government there, and how that has proceeded. Because we work with networks of interested civil society and government officials that are grappling with the same question. I mean, I think we're all interested in how does this really catch fire? How does this scale up so that it can really resolve the kind of problems that we've discussed here on this call, nutrition, ecological, et cetera. So we wanted to land in India and really ask probing questions to the practitioners about what have been their elements of success there. And so here's just a couple of quick snapshots you can see on the screen of our interactions between our network of, again, farmers and policymakers, et cetera, that came from all corners of the globe. So we had the opportunity in Andhra Pradesh to have Africans and Asians and Latin Americans, et cetera, in conversation with the farmers and policymakers in Andhra Pradesh, and had a chance also to get our hands dirty in the soil to understand the specific techniques of what is involved in the community-based natural farming in Andhra Pradesh. And likewise, it was a back and forth exchange. So just as we were able to observe how the work proceeds there, we were also able to share, some of the African farmers were able to share some of the challenges that they face there and some of their efforts to do similar work, albeit on a much smaller scale in other places. Since the time that we had together in India, we've since started up a COVID fund to help deal with some of the crises that have been faced in food security around the globe, and have been able to follow up with some of our colleagues that we met in India and have come to know since, and have been able to provide some support to a few civil society efforts around India, in Amrita Bhumi in Karnataka, the Tanal Trust in Kerala, and in Tamil Nadu consortium of women's organizations. So just to say that there's so much important work going on in India. Obviously, it's been referred to on this call, and we were really pleased in our own modest way to be able to support some of that work. I shared these images with you to just illustrate how important India is as a teaching ground for agroecology. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because there's no need to share that anymore. Let me just get rid of that. Go stop share. Okay, I'll just finish out my comments without the slides. So I just want to share these. I shared these images to illustrate the importance of India as a teaching ground for agroecology. And this teaching ground aspect is really reinforced by the Food and Agricultural Organization, the FAO's decision to make India a pilot country within the globally focused Scaling Up Agroecology Initiative. And the India case is highlighted in numerous global studies, such as the high-level panel of experts, a recent study on agroecology and other solutions that I believe Dr. Mueller was very instrumental in researching and writing. So thank you for that work. We also recently, since the COVID crisis happened, and to expand that kind of learning that we were able to glean from India, we had Mr. Vijay Kumar in our webinar describing how the women's help organizations in Andhra Pradesh are the backbone of building this resilient community-led food system. So even in the COVID crisis, we feel that India is really an important beacon for leading by example, and in turn, that's very important for global learning. And this in turn has the ability to be scaled up and out through India's importance as a teaching ground that's highlighted through the FAO process. And I've been at numerous meetings of the Committee on Food Security, for example, at the FAO, where the India case has proved to be an important basis for discussion. We were actually there was quite a bit of inspiration while we were in India, in particular from the Africans that wanted to bring the Indian case to the African Union, which is keenly interested in resolving the agricultural challenges there. And we're looking to bring, for example, Vijay Kumar to India. That work has been postponed by the pandemic, but will resume. And just to say that the Agroecology Fund we work not only with private philanthropic organizations, but bilateral and multilateral agencies as well, who all understand the tremendous power of agroecology to remedy so many of the nutritional, economic, and ecological and climate ills, the things that we've been speaking about on the call today. So we've initiated a global donors group amongst these agencies, from groups like the Global Environmental Facility to BMZ and GIZ in India, in Germany, and who are all seeking to pool their learning and pool investments. And we've initiated a working group that's specifically focused on India, in particular donors that are keen to support the practice and also research that demonstrates the efficacy of agroecology. And I think just by way, I just wanted to build on some points that have just been mentioned about research. Professor Chand wisely pointed out the need for more research. And of course, others have mentioned too, the challenges that we're facing as a globe in our food system will only deepen as the impacts of climate change are accelerating. And we see this, in particular, a confluence of difficult circumstances, such as the locust plague in Africa. And we're looking for ways, obviously, to calm the threats that face our food system by working with rather than against nature, which is a core principle of agroecology. And just to say that agroecology is, as has been mentioned, it's by nature a very knowledge-intensive process. It's based on farm-level experimentation, rather than a one-size-fits-all solution designed in laboratories that in the end can't fathom the diversity of agroecosystems. And so India, in a sense, is a perfect laboratory for participatory research. Usually a diverse country with diverse ecosystems, diverse crops, practices, et cetera. And it has so many fine research institutes that can work hand in hand with this really impressive ecosystem of myriad farmer associations at the civil society at the local level that are really keen to resolve their practical problems of pests and fertility and water retention, et cetera, So I think this is one of the, I think, really exciting areas of agroecology, is this whole idea of participatory research, co-generation of knowledge, which brings together the research community with the farmers. And I think India is really leading the way in that. So I just want to close by congratulating you all, those of you, thank you again for the opportunity for holding this conversation, and by considering how you can share your important work on natural farming across India and across the globe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I have just been informed that Mr. Sanjay Agarwal cannot join us. There are apparently some technical problems, and we still have 10 minutes. So I would like to use these 10 minutes in raising 2 questions to my fellow panelists. And I would like to find out, Professor Ramesh Chand, if you are also still online, because I would like to raise the first question to you, starting with thanking you for having highlighted the need for new research and for having made the proposal that we should kind of try to marry some of the best practices from conventional agriculture and what we can learn from natural farming. And if you can hear me, I would like to ask you, do you have an idea what kind of research we would need in order to do something new and not only just add 2 things which in the end might not really fit together? I like the idea, but do you have an idea what kind of research is needed? If you cannot join us, I'm going to raise this question to Ravi Prabhu and also to Daniel, so please be prepared. Professor Ramesh Chand, could you hear me, and is it possible for you to answer? Because I still see that you are on the list of participants, but I don't know if you are still connected via mobile phone. Now we can see you, and please unmute your microphone, then we can also hear you.
Unmuted, but still it is showing that organizer muted. I don't know what was the problem. Again, I'm not able to hear you.
I said we can see you and we can hear you. Welcome back.
Okay. Science must go into natural farming and regenerative or ecological farming. And one of the participants mentioned that we should not pick up the natural farming which was done by our forefather. After that, the things have changed in so many ways that if we use science in natural farming, that does not make it unnatural. Much natural, but we need to use science in natural farming in a different way than research, which is primarily based on agrochemical or exploitative kind of science. Like one thing which comes to me for purpose of giving example, in give example of intercropping, that you have some row of one crop, then you have 2 rows of another crop, like that. Important purpose. But if you are having that kind of cropping, you know that this kind of cropping again will not be subjected to uniform agriculture operation. You can't run particular type of small implements in these kind of things. So we need R&D in natural farming in all respect of natural farming. What kind of cropping system are best? What kind of crop combination are best? What are the consistencies among them? Where there is consistency among them? So we need to see all those aspects and strengthen the natural farming of science. Natural farming, I feel, can't compete with agrochemical evolution technology purely based on its merit that it does not harm biodiversity, it promotes soil organic matter, it promotes soil biology, all those kind of things. They are there, but science must go into it. And in fact, for subsequent roundtable, where we talk about what kind of science and what kind of potential is there, what kind of gains are application of modern science and R&D into natural farming.
Thank you very much. You made a very strong and important point that we need a new type of research, science for natural farming without making it unnatural. Ravi, you have 2 minutes to comment on it, and then I'm handing over to Daniel, and then I'm wrapping it up.
Thanks, Alexander, and thanks, Professor Ramesh Chanda. I would agree with the professor that we need a new kind of science. What I would also say is that we already have that kind of science. What I missed in my earlier presentation, Alexander and everybody, and Daniel, you mentioned it, is the work of my colleague, Professor Fergus Sinclair, who happens to be on the call today, who was the lead author in the high-level panel of experts report on agroecology, and a series of subsequent reports on agroecology, which brings together what this science is all about. We need more of it, there's no question about that. We need a science that values farmer knowledge, brings that into the experience. Farmer varieties, land races, all of these things we need much more work on. But we have already, speaking as a research institute on agroforestry, we've already shown massive increases in productivity and input just by adding trees into systems, something that agriculture sought to remove. The first thing most agricultural extension agents suggested in the 50s and 60s and 70s was to remove the trees out of the system, because you could not run your tractors because they shaded out the crops, etc. In fact, the opposite is true. We have shown in many countries around the world, we can increase the productivity depending on which kind of tree, how you deal with it. In terms of farmer income, there's no better system in India than the wheat poplar systems around Yamunanagar. I would then say what we need is to develop a science that works not just at the farmer's field, but all the way through the landscape. This is what we are trying in Andhra Pradesh together with our colleagues on RYSS, thanks to Mr. Vijay Kumar. I would recommend we try this in other parts of India. Let's make the proof evident to those who doubt it. And the final word on this is the cost of the agrochemical system has been totally underestimated. You cannot say one system is better than the other unless you look at its total costs. That would be like putting a person on a bicycle against a person on a Lamborghini, but denying the person on the bicycle the funds for the Lamborghini. This was your point, Alexander, when you talked about the capital-intensive agriculture of Germany and comparing that to the productivity of the capital-free agriculture of India. Well, give every Indian farmer $500,000 and let's see what the productivity is. That is the difference between agrochemical and natural farming. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Daniel, 2 minutes. Are you investing in research for agroecology and regenerative agriculture?
Absolutely, and I just want to suggest that we expand the scope of that kind of research beyond food production, that we look at some of the elements. I mean, we're talking about agroecology. It's not simply a food production system. We're looking more broadly at it being a foundation for a food system. And I think one thing that COVID points out very starkly is the inherent instability or the risks involved in the long supply chains that we have, which are inherent in the industrial food system. And what we need is increased research and understanding of how we can foster, how we can support shorter supply chains that really manage to connect much more closely farmers to markets, whether it's within urban environments or between rural environments and urban environments. I think this whole question about looking at that and what we're seeing, and I suppose this is a type of research, just in our brief interventions that we've been able to, our brief support that we've offered since the COVID crisis, is we've seen tremendous innovation in that kind of short supply chain resolution. How these farmers are able to resolve some of these, economic lockdown measures and be able to reach consumers, especially vulnerable consumers, homeless populations, older families that need food. So I think that let's talk a little bit about how to do that kind of sociological and economic research and how to support experimentation on these short supply chains, which is really the foundation of the kind of food system that we need in this kind of period of immense instability.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I would like to follow the example of my friend Pavan, who really ended his panel exactly on time. So I have 1.5 minutes, and I will try to conclude in the remaining 1.5 minutes before handing over. My takeaway message is we have to use agroecology as a system for innovation. It is very important for understanding it. We don't want to go back to the fathers and forefathers. We want to innovate research, as explained by Professor Ramesh Chand. We need a different type of research for natural farming. This is an innovation. We have to innovate the way we measure the results of agriculture. It doesn't make sense to look only at a narrow metrics, yields per hectare, and then forgetting the positive and negative externalities. We have to also innovate how we use traditional knowledge and bring it together with research and innovation. So in the end, for me, this innovative system builds up natural capital and social capital for the benefit of people and the planet. So this is a different type of understanding of innovation. The old type of innovation is linear. Let's do more of the same and let's speed up. But if you are driving with a car in a dead-end street, speeding up doesn't make sense. You have to change direction. And therefore, from my perspective, agroecology, regenerative agriculture poses lots of options and also challenges. But if we use it in the right way, it could become a system for innovation, for the benefit of people and for the benefit of the planet. With this, I would like to close and hand over to the next panel, where my friend Satya is the moderator. And Satya, to pose a question on you. If we have to innovate research, what does it mean for market access and sustainable finance? What kind of innovation is needed there in order to unfold the full potential of agroecology and regenerative agriculture? It will definitely not be the same system as we had it before. Satya, over to you. And I would like to thank all the panelists for great contributions and all the participants. We still have 59 participants for staying on so very long. Thank you, and over to you, Satya.
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you, everybody. It has been, just a second, I have to unmute my phone because I was also using my phone to listen in. So let me just sign off that one. Okay. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see Pavan raising his hand. So thank you very much. So we have a very exciting panel drawing upon the insights that have been shared by the panels led by Pavan and Alexander. And so we would be talking about market access and sustainable finance. Why? Because when we talk about value realization, to Ramesh Chand pointed out, with a lot more hard work, become an asset instead of a liability. And if the farmer gets a better price realization in the market, if the
something going on with the internet? Does someone else have internet?
And so if that is possible,
Satya, we are losing you for minutes at a time, so that this connection is not working from your side.
Yeah, maybe Satya, if you can kill your video.
I say go back to the phone because that's more reliable.
Let me introduce my fellow panelists today, which is perhaps the world's leading not-for-profit, encouraging and helping on the rollout of climate-sensitive investment across the planet, with offices literally across the globe. We have Joost Oorthuizen, who is the CEO of the Sustainable Trade Initiative, which again is perhaps the world's largest not-for-profits, works with stakeholders and help them with access to markets with the best possible prices that the market has to offer. We have with us Craig Kogut, who's the founder and chairman of Pegasus Capital Advisors. Craig is someone who is deeply into alternative investing. They already manage investments in processing waste and making wealth out of it. And then, of course, David Rosenberg, who's a pioneer in his own field, vertical farms. He's the founder and CEO of Aero Farms, which is one of the largest such facilities across the planet, and they're now spreading into different parts of the world with a very recent investment in Asia. So I know Joost has some time compulsions, so I would start with Joost and request you to, I mean, you've seen what it is, you've been to India and seen what is happening on the ground. IDH is also involved, signed an MOU with RYSS and is helping with market offtake of sustainably produced agricultural commodities in Andhra Pradesh and other parts of India. So tell us a little more about the potential and the opportunity for farmers at the grassroots. Joost, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Satya. Can you hear me?
You have to unmute.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks a million
Joost,
for.
You'll have to. Okay, thank you.
And thanks a million for having me on this panel. It's an honor, Minister and distinguished colleagues and guests. Yeah, so I'm the CEO of this Sustainable Trade Initiative, and we work on mainstreaming the sustainability of global agricultural foods across the planet, and work with governments and businesses to make that happen. And in India, we work on fairly large programs on sustainably grown cotton, spices, fruit and veg, and tea. I have 3 points to make, Satya. The first one is the importance of the key challenges to find commercially viable smallholder farming models in a way that we don't leave anybody behind, right? But that is also in sync with nature and with the soils that many people already talked about. I'm from the Netherlands, so if you allow me, the Netherlands is the second biggest agricultural exporter in the world nowadays, and I think it has done a tremendously good job in leaving no one behind, right? So we were able, from the Second World War till now, to build up a very commercially viable agricultural sector, invest in those smallholder farmers, build out some of the biggest banks in the world and the biggest milk cooperatives, and that now are multinational companies. And in the process, create very highly intensive agriculture, high productivity, and very efficient resource uses if you determine that in a per kilo basis. I think recently we started to realize, like anybody else, that we start to hit the boundaries of nature, right? Last year, that became very eminent, where we had a nitrogen crisis. So just before COVID hit our country, there was a very strong nitrogen issue that we could no longer meet EU regulations on the nitrogen residues on our natural resources. And therefore, the whole construction industry, something like 5,000 construction projects had to stop because of this nitrogen problem. So in a small country like us, where we have this very high intensive agriculture, it's very, very clear that we need to find new ways of, like what has been said already a few times, find commercial models that are in sync with nature, and where farming and nature somehow are friends rather than their enemies, like what we see nowadays. You also see some very great examples, I think, of farmers who are innovating along those lines. I just visited some of our greenhouse farmers in the Netherlands, and it's amazing how they are innovating, becoming completely natural farming, but still very, very highly intensive, where they have their own. They get carbon from industries around them, and they use that carbon to further improve their productivities on their greenhouses. They go for geothermal energy, become energy producers. So you see also, the lines between the agricultural sector and the energy sector start to fade away in new, more integrated farming models that are both commercial, but also are more in line with nature than they were in the past. So I think for India, there is a great opportunity to lead on this and to help find the world those new models that are based on natural farming and still be commercially meaningful. So that's my first point. My second point is my advice to India would be is that you go for the highest standards on food safety. The world is definitely, the export markets are asking for the highest standards, right? There is an increased awareness, I think, not just on the export markets, but also within the Indian market on the importance of food safety and food quality and residues on your production. And that is only increasing. The last 2 years, we have seen an enormous increase of market demand by aware consumers that demand healthy foods. We see a huge vegan movement in Europe, in the United States, and in Japan, but also in some of the emerging parts of the world. Vegetarian, and people want healthy foods, and healthy is fresh, but definitely it's also without any pesticides residues on it. And I think it makes great sense for India to become a leader there as well, and to link that not just on the export markets, but my advice would be that you use the same food safety standards within the country as well as for your export markets, if you want to become that global hub that I think India wants to become. And if I again talk about my own country, I think one of the reasons why the Netherlands is so powerful also as an agricultural hub on imports and export is because we are trusted, if you like, on those highest food safety standards, and that credibility and that integrity on food safety is something that I think the world will demand more and more. And again, there's a great opportunity for India there to take leadership. And my third point, Satya, is on smallholders. I think the key thing is smallholder business models. And I don't think the panelists have said much about that yet. So let me say a few words there. We have done a lot of work on smallholder business modeling around the globe, also in India, but also in other parts of the world, with companies from a value chain perspective based on market demand. And what we realize is there is not so much good business modeling going on. There's a lot of assumptions but proper modeling of what are the commercials, what are the cash flows, and under which conditions do they make sense for farmers, is something that there is a lot to be done, also in India. And what I tend to say nowadays is that it's not so much the smallholder that is the problem, it's the markets around the smallholder that are the problem. There are not the proper services to farmers, be them input services, be them knowledge services, be them financial services, that are lacking, because many of the private sector players shy away from engaging with smallholder farmers because they find it too risky, or they don't know the right price points to engage with them in any meaningful sense. So that last mile delivery problem is still a real issue. It is changing because of the digital world. So all of a sudden, I think over the last decade or so, we start to have much better access to smallholder farmers because of all of them nowadays being connected to the digital world, or not all of them, but many of them. So that brings great opportunity there, to link them into the markets. And that is so important also for natural farming. That has already been said many, many times over. It's all about knowledge. But we need to link that to a market demand and make it commercial. And therefore that smallholder farmer business modeling is very key. Now, related to that, and that's my last comment there, is is access to finance. If we want to help smallholder farmers on a natural farm business modeling concept to become commercially viable, we will need to de-risk their operations. So you will need finance to flow to those farmers. It cannot be no input, no output. It needs to be commercial. And therefore we need blended finance structures to allow to de-risk some of their operations. And again, I think India has some very, very powerful structures there already in place, with government support schemes, insurance schemes, guarantee schemes for micro irrigation, all these kind of things that again put India in a very good place to help your smallholder farmer population to get access to those services and to get access to affordable finance, and especially longer term finance. A farmer needs crop finance at least, so 6 months or a year. And if it's micro irrigation or any of the more capex investments, it's multi-year financing, and that is a big constraint for many of the smallholder farmers that we need to resolve together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joost. Excellent comments, especially on food safety and getting the resources to the farmers. Moving on to Sean. Sean, you've been quite a pioneer yourself. If people think natural farming is tough, when you started chasing up green finance and certifying climate bonds, the market literally did not exist. So tell us a little more about the challenges of being a pioneer, and what can India do to better access the international markets? Because by rough estimates, India needs about $50 to $60 billion if it wants to switch over to natural farming in terms of the capacity building expenses that it will need. So tell us a little more about the potential of the market and where India stands and what could it do better. Thank you.
Thanks, Satya. Thanks for having me here today. For those you don't know, Climate Bonds are an international NGO dedicated to mobilizing global capital for climate action, including in land use, of course. The question you ask is as much macroeconomic or regulatory as it is to do with land use or green bonds. Satya, there are some challenges. It's worth noting that in terms of what India needs to do in the next 10 years, in a range of sectors, not just in land use, but also in renewable energy and so on, actually India does have the capital resources. They are there. It's just that they're in the wrong place. We have overinvested drastically in gold. A third of the world's gold sits in the homes of Indians. That's what you call capital misallocation. Property. We have a property boom in places like Mumbai, which defies reality in many ways. And for a variety of reasons, we've overinvested in property. If we could figure out, and there are many people making very useful comments in this area, notably my friend Rathan Roy at the National Institute of Public Finance Policy, if we could figure out some different settings in those particular areas, we could probably harvest enough capital locally. And we still have significant capital in the investment sector that is interested in sustainable solutions, both in the high net worth area and the life insurance corporation. But of course, the reality is that's not happening as quickly as we'd like. And there is definitely opportunity to get international capital into the Indian market, at least to kickstart these kinds of changes. So there's a lot that can be done. The government is moving in steps and stages to make that a little bit easier, to open up issuance for overseas investors, to allow Indian entities to issue masala bonds overseas to avoid foreign exchange risk, because we do have appetite amongst international investors, quite strong appetite now, for government level issuance out of the Indian market. And in fact, if the government were to issue a sovereign bond, a sovereign green bond in rupees now, the demand would be extraordinary. And I'm saying this because I'm hoping someone from Treasury is listening. But of course, that doesn't solve the problems we have in the land use sector. I just want to start off with a couple of comments. I mean, clearly we're talking here about a middle of a crisis we're in. You know, there are economic impacts, there are food availability impacts. I mean, India's restrictions on some exports of food, for example, have major consequences for other countries that are relying on it. We need to be thinking about how we manage these issues going forward, because I want to say that the COVID crisis is not the last pandemic crisis we're going to have this century, and not the last crisis. Climate scientists have been telling us for a long time that pandemics will be a feature of the 21st century because of the pathogens jumping between species that you get when you do get degraded ecosystems and ecosystems in crisis as a result of climate change. So in a sense, this is a test run for us, because we can have pathogens with far more extreme impact than the one we're having now. Our mortality rate is surprisingly low compared to, say, SARS or something like that. We do need to learn that it's way beyond just health sector work we have to do. We do have to address the social protection and social support measures, which are of course really challenging in India at the moment, with the vast movement of people back to rural areas. And as I said, address food availability and reliability as part of it. But you know, at the same time, there is an interesting air of possibility that's arisen. You know, when you're in Delhi and you're looking at the air and you can actually see things now, the air is clean. It's an extraordinary moment in history. We need to savor this and capture the potential for the sense of potential for reworking and rethinking what we do have, both in terms of emissions and urban environments, and I think in terms of land use and how we manage our land. We've been hearing today some really interesting and useful comments about what needs to be done and where we need to go. We have to accelerate that transition. We can't afford to continue doing things the old way in the context of the world we're going into, which at the very minimum will see extreme weather volatility hitting India as one of the countries most exposed to climate change going forward. Predictions of the monsoon failing 1 year in 5 and so on. We need to change our approaches to catchment management to ensure that our aquifers stay replenished and don't get drawn out by too much taking out of the aquifer, etc., etc. Many, many things to do. But look, just getting to the bond market, the way we've grown what is now about $1 trillion green bond market globally, a thematic market, has been to get a lot of demonstration issuance out and to establish two key concepts. One is that it's about how you use the money. I'm going to frame it this way. I'm going to say that if Joost, who made some very useful comments now, wanted to borrow money to buy a car from his cousin, the cousin could say, sure, Joost, I'll lend you the money to buy a car, and that's it. Or he could say, Joost, I really think you've got to buy an electric car because of what's happening in the air now. We've got to get it cleaner. And Joost would say, okay, I will guarantee to pay you back, but I promise only to use the money to buy an electric car. And that is a green bond. That's all it is. And more to the point, Joost will promise to drive around every Christmas to show that he still has the electric car and take his cousin for a drive. That's the reporting and transparency components of the green bond. So in a sense, it's very simple. Anyone can do this. So sovereigns can do it. Banks like State Bank of India has now done 2 green bonds, NABARD, for example, and cities and even rural COPs could potentially, if we can get a market going, be doing things in these areas, if we're clear on what's green or what's sustainable. And that is the challenge, because in the agriculture space, of course, there's a wide range of practices and there are still some uncertainties. In the work we're doing at the moment in India with World Resource Institute and some other partners and NABARD, amongst others, we're looking at criteria for lending by a bank like NABARD, which would qualify in terms of our climate change resilience and also mitigation and concerns, how we actually address the threats of the future. And of course, we've looked at the project that you and Pavan have been working on in Andhra Pradesh as also another exemplary example of its natural farming process of an approach that would meet the mitigation and the resilience overarching concerns that we're looking at now. In the European Union, we've just published the taxonomy of sustainable finance that includes provision around agriculture for carbon maintenance and carbon sequestration, improving sequestration, reforestation, for example, or changing soil practices, and adaptation and resilience measures to try and drive this in Europe. Land use is the biggest area of emissions in the European Union. What we're trying to do is to make it clear to finance how you pick what's sustainable and how you pick what's not. You necessarily, as we have done in the green bonds market, need to be relatively binary in what you put out there. You've got to make a call. You can't publish a complicated process and say, if you follow this 14-page process and get a point score and so on, which is what we did in carbon markets, do it in a way which works for financial markets where the cost of the transaction, the patience, is simply not there. So rule sets count. They allow commoditization, well, I should say commoditization, standardization in markets, as it does in technology areas or fridges for that matter, boosts market growth. We haven't done enough work on this in agriculture to get clear rule sets, relatively usable rule sets that we believe are meeting our objectives published. But we have an opportunity now, and this is the area to work. We know that capital is interested. We know that whenever we issue an Indian green bond into the international markets, it sells like hotcakes on a fair day. It's very, very successful. In fact, different Indian institutions who've issued green bonds, everywhere from IREDA, the Renewable Energy Development Agency, to the Power Finance Corporation, to the State Bank of India, have got great interest rates, really good, by being able to exploit the arbitrage between Indian rates and European or Singaporean or Japanese or US rates, with the kicker of the excitement amongst that investor community for green and sustainable investment. That excitement is rooted in this idea that climate and environmental considerations are palpable and real threats to the sustainability of their portfolios. So if they can figure out which investments at a similar risk and yield are going to also address forward risk and be less risky than ones that aren't taking action on sustainability, they will go there. They will go there. And you see this in Europe, where you get a stock price bounce when a corporation issues a green bond, because investors use that as signaling for the fact that this organization is doing something to reduce forward risk and addressing climate risk. So that's the context in where we're operating in. We see the primary challenge in India, and this is the tough job, I have to say, that we're working on with people like NABARD, on what are the definitional issues. We know there's some things that work very clearly. Much of that's been spoken about today, but we need much more. And then we need to translate that into rules for a rural cooperative lender that they can implement, because this is challenging, right? They're not going to be able to learn from this particular webinar about the details. They have to have a simple rule set they can apply, and then we can aggregate that to deal with this gap between large bond markets and farmers, that aggregate that into big loans and bonds and tap cheaper capital through those means. That's the idea. Of course, there's lots of room for new structures, such as the Andhra Pradesh project, Satya, that you've been working on, or been contributing to, I should say. There's scope for specialist funds, blended capital we've heard about today. These are all, specialist funds are all necessary. In China, we've been working for the central bank for some times. There are now 700 green and sustainable funds, investing in everything from railways to buildings to agriculture. This discussion we're having in India is a discussion we're also having with the Agricultural Development Bank of China. So it's not just an Indian consideration. And I think in terms of specialists in different emerging markets, there's lots of scope for collaboration, even beyond the geopolitical hostilities that we experience between different countries. And we do need to collaborate in these kinds of ways. I think the opportunity is huge. This particular market, the green bond market and sustainable bond market, is the fastest growing asset class on the planet. It grew 50% globally last year. Even in this crisis, this COVID crisis, it's likely to grow 50% this year. The investor demand for stuff here is huge. So we just need to get agricultural scientists helping us with rule sets, bankers of structuring, whoosh, we believe money will flow.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thank you. It's amazing how the market is growing exponentially, while if you go down to the micro level, not every country is benefiting at the same way. There's some countries that are ahead of the pack. And so the lesson here is that the opportunity is right there. We just have to seize it and make it work for us. Thank you so much, Sean. And so let me invite now Craig. I've already mentioned to you about who Craig is. Let me invite him to talk to us a little bit about the opportunity as he sees it, because he's been working on alternative investments for a long time. Craig, the floor is yours.
Satya, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for speaking so late, particularly in India. The leadership in Andhra Pradesh and as we've heard, at a continued focus on agriculture and its multiple aspects is very exciting. I'm here as an investor, as Satya said. We look at science, we speak with many of the people who are active in the field, but we're investors. We invest, just a little background, in two areas at Pegasus. We invest, first of all, in sustainability and climate change investments. We're one of the few, I'm sad to say, one of the few US investors accredited by the Green Climate Fund. And we also invest in health and wellness. And as has been amply mentioned, one of the obvious aspects of regenerative agriculture and natural farming is this incredible linkage, apart from climate aspects and food and water and waste and carbon emissions, but the other aspect of producing healthy and nutritious food and utilizing the natural microbiome, which is an area we're very interested in for human health, is immense. Regenerative agriculture, I think, has the potential, particularly at the scale you have in India, to be sort of an inspiration to the rest of the world in terms of becoming a showcase for agricultural technologies. We've launched recently in partnership with our partners at IUCN, the R20, the Regions for Climate Change, based in Geneva, as well as Gold Standard, a $750 million sub-national focused climate infrastructure fund. And one of the areas we are very focused on is regenerative agriculture for the reasons I outlined. And particularly, as many of the panelists have mentioned, in the post-COVID world, or still in the COVID world, the importance of dealing both with the resiliency, as we will have more climate disasters, but also producing reliable supply chains for local markets, and also healthy food to boost immunity and provide nutrition, I think will never be in higher demand than it is now. So I think if we step back, maybe to be helpful to you, what do we need? Because I do think there is ample increased knowledge of the ability of science and systems thinking to be applied. And with some of the earlier panelists, what they're doing, I think there's will be eager to invest, particularly in places like India, given the scale. The first thing I think we look for, and why we're attractive, because we do want to invest very strongly in regenerative agriculture in India, is to have local champions on the ground, the grassroots level. They can be technical partners, business partners, but the linkage between bringing innovation and connecting with the farmer and working, again, at the grassroots level is absolutely crucial, I think, to make projects to be successful. The second thing I think that's necessary is strong local, regional, and national leadership at the governmental level. I think you've shown that, obviously, with the Andhra Pradesh project, and I think that's a model which I know you're working on replicating. But I think that's such an important set of signals to investors. The third comment I would make is lots of projects are talked about and never really launch. And I think given the first two factors, what we and other investors are looking for and eager to invest in are shovel-ready projects, particularly, again, as the case with the scale you have in India, projects that are scalable and replicable. And I think as we look at projects, that ability to put out sizable dollars and then replicate them in other parts of India are absolutely crucial. One other aspect I think that's very important, and again, it's agriculture. We talk about agriculture, we end up, as people have mentioned, talking about so many other things. But agriculture creates for an investor ample opportunity to invest in ancillary businesses. They can be waste businesses and biofuels. They can be water businesses. They can be renewables connected to agriculture, like solar heating with water. So that's one area. A second area, which has been alluded to and I'm involved in, is solving this issue of how do we reach the farmer. With technology, I think there's some tremendous platforms and new systems which will connect the farmer, help them with logistics, and bring them both to local markets and international farmers who will give them value and connect them directly with consumers who, again, to repeat, there is, as Jos mentioned, I think a significant change. It was already happening pre-COVID, but post-COVID, there is a clear desire to know where food comes from. Is it healthy? What was applied? So I echo the comments about food safety, but I think technology can play a dramatic role in that area. And so I think that's another area to encourage investment. Lastly, the opportunity to build rather basic processing plants, again, at the grassroots level locally, as well as using food science to do more advanced products that are added value. I think, and obviously you have great food scientists in India, is really focusing on nutrition, a tremendous opportunity. So thank you for your leadership, and I look forward with working with you all.
Thank you, Craig. That's wonderful. Let me move on now to David. And I mean, he does something which is extraordinary in the sense that in very little piece of land, you could actually grow as many stacks of leafy greens or vital nutrient-rich produces as you can. So taking, I mean, of course, the resources are needed, but the land goes out of the equation, not as much as is needed in land-based farming. So there are quite a few lessons there for us to draw from. And so let me move on to David and ask him, how do we do this in India? I know there are some boutique projects, but how does this happen at scale in India? And is this good for India? I mean, is this something that India really needs? David.
Yeah, thank you, Satya, and a pleasure to be with everyone today. I'll answer that. I'll give you a quick background on AeroFarms and then answer that question and also comment on some of what I've heard this morning. So first, AeroFarms, we're a vertical farming company. As people could see behind me, we define vertical farming as layer upon layer of farming. So we grow without sun, without soil. Turns out plants don't need sun, they need spectrum of light. So we work hard to understand what spectrum, at what intensity, at what frequency different plants want. And it could vary quite a bit in terms of frequency, spectrum, intensity, the diurnal cycle, by frequency, how long that lighting period lasts. And then they don't need soil, they need nutrients and micronutrients. So we understand like what plants want, also temperature, humidity, pH, and how do we get it basically what it wants when it wants it. And we've grown, just to give you a sense, probably about 900 different varieties of plants, but we only know how to make money right now on about 50 of them. So it's a learning curve. When we grow a new type of plant, it could take as much as 4 years to understand how to grow it really well and scale it up in a commercial facility. It's very different growing a plant the size of, for example, one's living room versus growing a plant the size of a facility you see behind me. It's just different problems to solve. If you think of, for example, flowering plants, how do you pollinate? And it's not just about pollination. How do you pollinate 40 feet up or 50 feet up, 80 feet down a tunnel? Is it automation and pollination? Is it the honeybee? Is it some manual pollination? Whatever the problems are, they scale differently. And our aim is to grow new crops, grow them really well, and while reducing capital cost and operating cost, and to scale. And we've built, and I appreciate some of the comments on smallholder farmers by, I think it was Sean. And here, we build small farms and big farms, and we see, similar to the smallholder farmer, the economies of scale don't exist in the smallholder farmers. There's a market for them, but often it's a market where success is defined by inspiration or some wealthier party that just wants access to better food or hyper-local food. But you don't have the economies of scale of how to be a farmer, items around food safety, problem solving when problems occur, and access to the market. There's like sales, marketing, and the economies of scale often in farming is in packaging, processing. So sometimes it's washing and packaging. For us, we don't have a washing because we grow without pesticides. But how do you package? There's a lot of automation in packaging. And once you put in automation, you want a lot of growing to utilize automation. Growing scales in a linear way, meaning you want more growing, add more growing towers, packaging in a non-linear way. So once you put in that packaging, you want a lot of growing to always run that automation 24/7. And small projects, we have automation, for example, in the facility you see behind me, automation between seeding, harvesting, cleaning, packaging, and now we have automation between all those steps. You wouldn't put any automation in with a small farm because you'd be running it maybe 10 minutes, an hour a day. So now to comment on like what I see and how something like this is relevant for India, but also other issues looking at the United States and some of the problems we have, and also seeing things globally. One is we have this notion of water should be free. And water, when it comes down from the sky, it might be free, but once you have to move it, there's a real cost for that. And as we keep prices of some of these items like water artificially low, it really takes the incentive for innovators like myself to solve problems. And it almost disincentives it. Because if we, for example, grow a plant using 95% less water and water is artificially low, there's no economic benefit for that. And the market doesn't value it because we're actually, with this notion of making water low, we're taking away that economic incentive. So I'm a free markets person. So as much as possible, I would argue, let the markets dictate prices and then the innovators solve problems. An example of like some items that don't get captured in externalities that are real costs are fertilizers and pesticides. So right now, some chemicals are really cheap and farmers don't necessarily know how to apply them. I would say that's more so the case even for smallholder farmers, but they just put a lot of chemicals on our soils and it leads to soil degradation and also pollution, water degradation as well. Water pollution, most water pollution comes from agriculture. There are some areas like Salinas, California, where because of over fertilizing led to algae blooms and dead zones in the water, they've started putting a tax on fertilizers. And what happened? They captured that painful externality and prices went down. And this is, again, another way to benefit innovators. If we grow using, let's say, 70% less fertilizers and we grow using 0 pesticides, now there's an economic benefit because the environmental degradation that those chemicals can add is captured in the market economy. So what we have to do is we have to think about what are the right incentives to reward good actors, and what are the, in the converse area, what are the sticks to pull away from not necessarily bad actors, but people doing the wrong action. And there's a lot of over pesticides, over fertilizers in food. The other part of this is behavioral change. So how do we make the customer aware to ask the right questions? And here, labeling is important. So in it, and we have to be careful, items aren't prescriptive based, but performance based. So it shouldn't say like grow in a vertical farm, or it shouldn't say grow in a field, or grow hydroponically or aeroponically. That's prescriptive based. It should be performance based, like how much water did we use? And here, I think it was Sean saying rule based. And how do we make this rule based? You just talked about food safety as well. So what are the, and this is one of the advantages of COVID-19, I think the world sees how, especially in the US, we have centralized food production, and the dangers of centralized food production, where in an epidemic, the whole grid could go down. A more distributed system could add maybe higher costs, but higher safety in situations like this. So how do we get the customer to see value in this? And labeling is important. Performance-based, how much water do you use? How much pesticides do you use? What's the, it could be, are you paying a fair wage in people? But how do we get this information to the customer so they could easily absorb it, and they could also make intelligent decisions and reward good actors who are pushing performance? So I think there's a big partnership here between the public sector, communicating with the public, and incentivizing the innovators like myself to go ahead and solve hard problems. Thanks, Satya.
Thank you, David. Before I come back to all the panelists with a parting question to wrap up, I want to invite. I know that we have Keith with us. Keith is the founder and CEO of Producers Market. I see that a question was raised by Dr. Rajiv Kumar about certification, which is extremely important to the smallholder, because the smallholder can clearly not afford the cost of certification by themselves. It really has to be something that happens at scale for them rather than by them, because then it becomes unsustainable. So it has been suggested that digital certification, digital access to the digital world, where they can, it's a data-driven certification process that is jurisdictional in nature. And so Keith is someone who's worked quite a bit on that. Keith, in 2 minutes, could you quickly tell us how this could be really beneficial for smallholder farmers?
Sure. Thank you, Satya. And also thank you to everyone else. It's been such an inspiring last couple hours here, and really grateful for everyone involved. And so, yeah, I'm a CEO of Producers Market, and we're working on digitizing the post-harvest supply chain and creating greater connectivity between the agricultural producers and the aggregators, and ultimately the downstream market, both regionally, nationally, and internationally, and looking at how do we use the market connectivity to incentivize these regenerative practices, and also how do we bring more capital back to the farmers in the term of cash for their crops, as well as equity into their value chain. And it's been an amazing experience getting to know intimately the RYSS community and ZBNF movement, and working with UNEP. And I just want to share a couple thoughts here that I've prepared. First, that COVID-19 has revealed supply chain vulnerabilities, highlighting the importance of investing in the digitization of value chains and the facilitation of real-time connection of producer outputs for regional and international markets. In addition, by connecting consumer demand premiums for sustainable chemical-free products to upstream producers, we can encourage regenerative agriculture incentives. Mass adoption of regenerative agriculture practices by small farmers has been identified as one of the key drivers to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And so what we want to really do is create a platform that is unifying these dispersant value chain participants and supporters to form a more cohesive value chain database and data system to really enable this resiliency and empowerment, both ecological, social, and the greatest driver we believe is economic. And to some of the points made today, and I think at the beginning of this session, the market for health and wellness connected to food products has exploded because of COVID. And there was already this massive trend towards consumers demanding organic. And just to give an international perspective, some of the more recent statistics show around 84% of Americans now sometimes buy organic, and about 45% buy regularly. And now with COVID in this new world, they say it's 21 days to create a trend and 90 days, to create a habit, and so, or a lifestyle. And with this new lifestyle is eating at home and receiving products to home. And because of that, there's a greater attention being put on where the products are coming from and how this is going to affect their wellness. And so there's been reports of 20 to 40% increase in organic sales across certain value chains here in North America. And plant-based alternatives as well has been skyrocketing with an estimated 27 to 30% growth during this period. And when we say organic, and we've talked so much about this with Satya and RYSS, is organic, it's the meaning of what's behind it that's drawing all of this attention. And it's really about people wanting to, number one, avoid pesticides, number two, avoid GMOs, and number three, have more nutritious outputs. So we believe that by marketing and branding this movement in a very impactful way digitally, in a very efficient way, in a community-driven way, socially and digitally, that there could be real great demand as well as premiums for these types of practices. So the positive externalities that currently exist for the wonderful impacts on the environment, on social welfare, from the families who are growing through to the consumers who are using the products, that there could be a greater premium rewarded for these practices that's driven by capitalism and the markets having a demand for this. So, thank you all. Thank you, Satya, for letting me jump in for a moment, and just super grateful for everyone's contributions today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Keith. We know that you have been working very diligently with friends across India to help develop the value proposition of naturally farmed producers. Before we wrap up, let me invite all the panelists to, in 30 seconds, that we value your partnership, so we would like to work with you moving forward in helping India achieve its true potential. But if you had one thing to offer, one advice to offer to India in 30 seconds, what would that be in scaling up sustainable finance investments in natural farming sector in India, in regenerative agriculture? Let me start with Sean.
We're at the moment very focused on a rules-based approach for scalability. Here we need to be clear as we're able, in a way that's utilizable by the finance sector, of what should be done, and by implication, of course, what is not a priority to do. We can get that right to the extent that a lending officer in a Lucknow rural lending organization can understand. We can make this a very significant force for getting lower cost capital into this particular sector.
Thank you, Sean. Craig?
I would say two things. One, I'd echo clear rules as to where the priorities are. And secondly, help with the national government in dealing with local and regional governments in being supportive of really leading innovation.
Thank you, Craig. David?
And in the spirit of just coming up with something new that I haven't said, behavior. So what are the behavioral changes? For example, there's good quality food that, because of the history of dysentery, of what's in the field and farming, people cook a lot of the vegetables. As one cooks vegetables, for example, a lot of the nutrient density gets reduced. So if there's a different class of fruits or vegetables, it doesn't need to get cooked. People can enjoy them fresh. It's a healthier experience. And that'll, I think, also in turn help reward good actors, where sometimes some better quality food, that risk of disease goes down tremendously.
Thank you. Keith?
Yes, I think digital traceability is going to be very important so that there can be a lasting trust and authenticity to this natural farming movement. So without bringing some form of validation, there could be a lot of fraud. And so it's important in the mind and hearts of the consumers in India and globally that this movement has the authenticity it deserves.
Thank you all. It has been a fascinating conversation.
Satya?
Oh, Joost, you're hearing in. I thought you were left. So please, it's your time.
Sorry, can you hear me or not?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Yes, we
Okay,
can now.
thanks. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so what I like to add is jurisdictional verification. So I think India has a great opportunity to create very strong public-private partnerships on this from a jurisdictional perspective, because then you bring in the government power, the government regulation, together with the private sector and its market demands. So do it at a jurisdictional level, then you also get away with this very expensive smallholder certification problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. With that, let me hand back the microphone to Dr. Rajiv Kumar, the Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satya. And thanks to all the panelists and the moderators and for this wonderful, very inspiring session. And ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged actually to have with us Dr. K. Vijay Raghavan. He's the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Prime Minister, himself a frontline researcher, runs his own lab in life sciences in Bangalore, still commutes, of course, pre-COVID between Delhi and Bangalore to look after both his jobs. And thank you, Vijay, for being with us, because as you can imagine, agroecology is life science, and we have to be in the frontiers of technology, as people have said. So over to you without further ado on your remarks.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. It's been really wonderful listening to the whole range of talks. I mean, it's really been very, very valuable. I came in the evening thinking that wasn't being sure about what I learned, but I learned so much. We started off with environment and ecology, went to regenerative agriculture, and then market access and sustainable finance. And each one of them were absolutely terrific. Now, one of the metaphors which was used was that, we've been touching different parts of the elephant and interpreting it. And now we must work together as we touch the elephant and understand the elephant. That is very, very true. The principal challenge which I see, though, is who is going to be, herding the decipherers of the elephant so that they can come together and have a common understanding. So far, our understanding of agriculture and its use have been embedded in what has happened over the last 5 or 6 decades. And much of what we have learned has come from a combination of science and technologies which have been implemented in a manner which we have seen has had dramatic effects on the environment. But that's not a peculiarity of agriculture itself. It's a peculiarity of how humans, post-industrial revolutions, have dealt with the world. Let me very briefly run through 1 or 2 of those aspects. Fundamentally, we need to, if you want to understand agriculture and humans and our interaction with our ecosystem, we need to understand evolution. In evolution, what happens through natural selection, different plants and animals survive in their interactions with the environment. They don't necessarily have to be extraordinarily fit. They have to be fit enough to survive. This means plants need to deal with insects, with water supply, with soils, and so on and so forth. And humans need to find what they can eat, breed those plants or animals, domesticate them, and the domestication of plants and animals transformed human life. But as humans became more and more social, there was a limitation on how much they could get from plants. And that limitation was nitrogen in the soil. They tried to go past that limitation by putting guano or nitrite from nitrite mines, and they ended up finding that too being limiting. Then they invented the Haber-Bosch process. And the Haber-Bosch process allowed the creation of fertilizers. Other chemical industry allowed the creation of pesticides. And then there was no limit to yield. Yield came, as we've heard today, at the cost of diversity and nutrition. And nutrition was addressed in rich countries in multiple other ways, again, by mechanisms of agriculture, animal husbandry, which were extremely intense on the environment. This ability of humans to keep on transforming the environment to our ends comes from our ability to use language, to make tools, and our extraordinary brain, which allows us to communicate with each other and to create machines which communicate to each other. That brain, disproportionate in size to our body size as other primates, comes again because of our ability to cook food in a manner so that we can get huge calorific content in a single meal. So this is history. Now, in addition to this history, we should understand evolutionary history. There is a complexity which we have created in the world. By putting environment as secondary, as something which the future pays for, we have made extraordinarily available the quote-unquote fruits of technology in a manner where we've had unbridled growth and complexity for which future generations will continue to pay. That ability of future generations to pay will continue, or we thought will continue, if there's a bottomless pit of resources. That is no longer the case. We now are masters of the globe, and the globe and its safety is our responsibility. So we are not mere survivors. So we need to change our attitude towards use of fertilizers, pesticides, water, and fundamentally towards nutrition. Now this looks, as many have said, many conventional agricultural people would say, that's very, very difficult. And indeed it is difficult. But keep in mind that this growth I have described is also relatively recent. It's only over the last 100 years. And in that 100 years, human population and societies have become hugely complex. That illustrates the power of the exponential, no doubt. But the exponential can work in other ways too. And today, we must embrace technology, and we have seen some examples of that. And because of new technologies, the very technologies which have created the situation today have resulted in new forms of technologies which can be much more distributed, much more local, much more empowering, and therefore also much less impactful on the environment. Let me give you one example. Why this is so? Well, there are two examples. One is the change in electronics. The phone charger which you had was as big as a brick a few decades ago. Now it's very small. That has happened because of a revolution in power electronics. This means that all sorts of things, motors, TV, cameras, what you need in agriculture can be done at the village level. Secondly, power supply can come from renewable sources. This combination of having power devices and power supply available at small farms at a local level can make small farm holdings profitable. Technologies now can change the way you do farming because we have intense, water intense, pesticide intense, fertilizer intense farming, because you told scientists, you have unlimited water, you have unlimited fertilizers, unlimited pesticides, increase yield. Now if you tell scientists, you have limited water, near zero pesticides, near zero fertilizers, keep yield high, keep nutrition high, it can be done. So it all depends on the kinds of boundary conditions you put. Scientists can deliver depending on what kinds of boundary conditions you act. So it's not technology per se or science per se, which is good or bad. It's what demands we make of scientists as a society. And GM, for example, is not good or bad. It can be appropriate in some conditions. I don't have time to go into that. In other conditions, it's unnecessary. It just focuses on increasing yield and so on and so forth. So to end, there are three things which we need to address. One, regulation. Steadily change regulation in a manner where it makes sustainable agriculture both remunerative and effective. Secondly, while we go into commercialization, factor in environmental costs. They should be put into the cost of what we make, whether it's a car or a tomato. Once we pay for the real cost, then we will have better choices. And finally, people. People, our farmers, our poorest of the poor, are at the core of everything we do. If there are ways by which we can have the best in technology, the best in science, going to them so that their nutrition and their lives and their economic status and livelihood can be addressed, we've done it all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Thanks a ton. And I think what I've heard from you is really music to my ears, and you're absolutely right. Science and scientists can deliver. We've got to redefine the boundary conditions. And I think it's time that we all did it together. But first and foremost, let me begin my closing remarks, very brief closing remarks, by thanking everybody who's participated. I noticed there's still 54 of us on this call, and people like Professor Walter Yane, who probably now well beyond the midnight into the early morning. Amazing. Thanks a ton for your being with us, and we'll continue to interact and so on. So all of us, I mean, 3 hours, 3 hours plus on an online conference it can be taxing, but I guess we have redefined boundary conditions, so we are getting reused to it actually. So this is what we're doing now. So there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I can't thank everybody enough, but let me just start saying that it's clear, it's very clear that agroecology is the call for the time. I mean, agroecology has to be done because we have only one planet, and I think we've done enough, harm to this planet. And this is very much in line with the Indian tradition, which never was man conquering nature, which was a Marxist tradition, or an Occidental tradition where the last frontier or last contradiction was defined between man and nature. We always had man in nature or man with nature. And I think that's the one that we need to work through. I mean, the disappearance of all the different species, and all of that, and this predominance of the Homo sapien, to what we just said, that without realizing the responsibility that we have towards this homeland, this habitat of ours, I think just has to end. The time has come. And I think today, in the post-COVID world, must be that tipping point where we must believe, we must start to believe that we have to do things differently. Business as usual will simply not work. And I think that's very clear. I think this is where we have to, paradigm is an often used, almost a misused word very often. But friends, I think really we need a paradigm shift to make sure that we are able to meet a very basic need of preservation through food by means which are different than what we've had today. So therefore, here I think we need a knowledge-intensive agriculture. It has to be. It is a necessary condition. We have to believe that there are no inexhaustible resources, and as Ravi said, no black holes around in this planet to absorb all the dump and the residues that we throw at it. I mean, there are also finite. So therefore, we need to make agriculture more knowledge intensive. And I think and to do that, as somebody said, and I forget, I think Mr. Alexander Mueller said that we need to redefine the metrics by which we are measuring performance. I think that's the big one, because I think unless we redefine the metrics and bring in the whole landscape, and not just environment, and not, for example, I tell you, in India at least, we've seen that we've grown agriculture, but also we've seen growing farmers' distress. Now the two are incompatible. So I mean, how do we? And this is why our Prime Minister has made the very different approach of never emphasizing agricultural production, but talking about doubling farmers' income. And when you talk about incomes, it comes from revenues as also costs. So if you can reduce costs, if you can reduce risks, and if you can reduce uncertainties for the farmer, you've done a great deal. Plus then externalities, both negative and positive. And for me, the big one, really the big one that I mentioned is that if you can actually absorb carbon, and therefore in India's case, for example, if you can get access to carbon credits and to green bonds, etc., we must now begin to think in those terms. And this is where I hope the global agro research system of all institutions and in India, our Indian Council for Agricultural Research with its vast networks and resources should now begin to change direction and ask their people to answer the questions that my colleague Dr. Ramesh Chand raised about how do we bring the scientific evidence to show that this is a form of agriculture which can be repeated, replicated, scaled, consistent, and work along with and absorb new technology. I think the research system have to be doing that, and I hope that at least in India we will be able to do this with all of the relevant people present and on board. So let's try. And as I said, some of you have said that India can be the leader in this regard. At least let us assure that that India will not miss this bus of growing consciousness of nourishment, of a growing demand which will explode now for food quality and nourishment in the food, and not just food per se. And I think that's what has been pointed out. I think that one simple fact of 84% of Americans now buying, organic food and 45% doing it regularly. COVID will make sure that this is only going to be an exponentially rising curve. And this is where I think we can be on that curve, and we can be, because and finally, I think it's critical. It's critical to combine traditional knowledge with modern technology. It's not, it can be nobody's case that regenerative agriculture, agroecology, natural farming will not be scientific. It has to be, in fact, at the cutting edge of science. And that's what I heard from Professor Voltayane when he lectured us at NITI Aayog. We need to understand, just as in medicine, we are shifting from DNA mapping to gut microbial mapping, which is far more difficult, but is possible now because of the huge computing power that we have. We can now shift to understanding the microbial activity underneath the soil and how water connects and how and how the humus attracts more water from the atmosphere, and how we can make use of the rivers of water which are there in the atmosphere and bring them down to earth. And gentlemen, as you can notice, I've been inspired. Otherwise, such closing remarks are not easily made. I'm not an agro-scientist. I'm but a mere economist. So thank you all tremendously for being so engaged, so original, and so inspiring. And I hope that we'll be able to collect you again after a few months to be able to tell you what we have done and hear from you what's going on in the rest of the world. Thank you, Satya. Thank you, Vijay, who's in the background. Vijay Kumar from Andhra, who's done it. Thank you, Professor Ramesh Chand. And thanks everybody who's made this such a great success going forward at this point of time. Thanks a ton. Over to you, Satya, if you want to say a few thanks at the last.
Well, I just wanted to express my gratitude to Dr. Rajiv Kumar and Mr. Narendra Singh Tomar, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, and also to the inspiring comments by Professor Vijay Raghavan in bringing it so well together. It is not man versus nature. It is man in nature and man with nature, because we are just one of the 7.8 million species that inhabits the planet, and we are at risk of losing 1 million of them already without even understanding how they populate and integrate the web of life that sustains humans, which are now exploding at 8 billion and counting. So this is a great initiative of the NITI Aayog. And I can talk certainly for UNEP and the other colleagues that are leading great international institutions that are here today, Pawan and others. We are with you, and we'll work in support of your ideas, your imagination, as India tries to find its meaningful place and achieve its true potential in the new arrangement. And as many speakers have talked about, the COVID-19 and the changed world. And I know that this is going to change over the next few months, in the sense that we would know more about COVID and perhaps would have found a vaccine and potentially a cure. But the fact that these kind of pandemics will become more and more regular, given the climate challenge, and given that we are literally at the precipice of breaching the threshold of the 2 degrees Celsius that everybody talks about. So this is absolutely fascinating, and we are privileged and honored to be a part of this conversation, and we'll work in your support and that of Government of India. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Pawan. Thank you. Thanks, Chetan.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Walter.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Vijay. Bye. Good night. Good night for now.
Bye. Good night.
Thanking everybody who joined the call.
Bye. Take care.
Bye, sir. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Viren will wait for everybody to leave.
Yeah, I'm just saving the chat and questions.
Yes, start and we'll save the recording as well. Yes.
Yeah.